Pain. It hurts. The head hurts. The bizarre dreamland full of whispers quickly shattered. Zhou Mingrui, who was asleep, felt that his head had a painful ache as if he had been slammed with a pole. No, it was more like a sharp object piercing through his temple and accompanied by stirring. Stumbling, Zhou Mingrui tried to stand up. He had wanted to rub his head and sit up, but he could not move his hands and feet. It seemed that his body had lost control. Perhaps, I haven't really been awake yet. I might be in my dreams, thinking that I'm awake but actually I am still sleeping. As someone who was not familiar with such situations, Zhou tried to focus his mind to get rid of feeling of darkness and constrained. However, as a person who was half asleep, his will was as erratic as smoke, his thoughts were difficult to control and difficult to converge. However hard as he tried to focus his thoughts, it was in vain. Why do I suddenly have a headache? And so much pain. Could it be cerebral hemorrhage? F***K, will I die prematurely in this year? Wake up. Wake up. Hey, it doesn't seem to be so painful anymore. But in the head there is still something like a blunt knife slowly cutting. It seems that I can't continue to sleep. How can I go to work tomorrow? Why do you want to go to work? It's a real headache, of course, take a medical leave. Don't be afraid of the manager's mumbling. It doesn't seem that bad now. After all, I've earned a day off. After a series of tingling sensations, Zhou Mingrui accumulated some illusionary mind power. Finally, he thumped his back to open his eyes and completely escaped the half-sleepy state. The line of sight was blurred at first and it was cast with a faint blush of crimson. Zhou Mingrui saw a wooden desk in front of him. There was an open notebook in the middle. The paper was rough and yellow and there was a sentence in strange letters. The words were written in dark, eye-catching ink. On the left side of the notebook, there was a neat stack of books by the edge of the table. There was about 7 or 8 books in total. The walls on the right-hand side were inlaid with gray-white pipes and wall lamp was connected with the pipes. The lamp had a Western classic style. It was about half the size of an adult's head. The inner layer was a transparent glass and the outside was surrounded by ferrous metal. Underneath the extinguished wall lamp, a black ink bottle shrouded in light red brilliance and the embossed surface formed a blurred angel pattern. Before the ink bottle, a round head, dark-colored pen lay quietly on the right side of the notebook. The tip of the pen shimmered in the dim light and the cap rested next to a brass revolver. A gun. A revolver. Zhou Mingrui was stunned. The things he saw were so strange and bore no similarity to his own room at all. Amidst the shock, Zhou realized that the desks, notebooks, ink bottles and revolver were all covered with a layer of red gauze. This was because of the light shining through the window. Subconsciously, he lifted his head and moved his eye upwards a bit. In the middle of the sky, above the black velvet curtain, a crimson full moon glowed serenely. This. Zhou Mingrui's fear rose inexplicable, he swiftly stood up, but his legs were not completely straightened and his head was tinged with pain. This caused him to lose his strength momentarily and he fell uncontrollably. His butt slammed into the hard wood and landed on the chair surface. Thump. The impact did not cause any injury. Zhou Mingrui pressed his hands on the table, tried and stood up again. He panicked and observed the environment he was in. This was a small room with brown doors on the left and right. There was a low wooden bed next to the opposite wall. There was a cupboard between it and the left door, facing each other and with 5 drawers. In the edge of the cabinet, there was also a gray-white pipe on the wall at a height of a person. It was connected to a strange mechanical device with a few places exposed by gears and bearings. Near the desk, the right corner of the room was piled with things like coal stoves, as well as soup pots, iron pots and other kitchen utensils. Behind the right door was a two-way mirror with a simple and plain wooden base. After sweeping his eyes, Zhou Mingrui vaguely saw himself in the mirror, and his current appearance, black hair, brown pupil, linen shirt, thin, average-looking features, slightly deep facial outline. This. Zhou Mingrue suddenly breathed in deeply, many helpless and messy speculation emerged in his mind. The revolver, the European classical flavor setting and the crimson moon that was very different from the Earth, all pointed to one explanation. Did I transmigrate? Zhou Mingrue's jaws dropped. As someone who had grown up with web novels, he often had fantasized about transmigrating. However, when he actually encountered it, it was difficult to accept. This was probably the so-called Yi Gong's passion for the dragon, one. After a few dozen seconds, Zhou Mingrue bitterly muttered himself. If not for the pain still existing in his head and the consciousness that had become sharper and clearer, he would think that he was dreaming. Calm down. Take a few deep breaths, and Zhou Mingrue tried hard to make himself not flustered. At this moment, with his reconciliation of mind and body, a memory fragment suddenly jumped out and appeared in his mind. Klein Moretti, a citizen of the northern continent, ruined kingdom, Alwa province, city of Tingent. He was also a student who just graduated from the Department of History at Hoi University. His father was a sergeant of the Royal Army and sacrificed in a colonial conflict of the southern continent. The pension he received provided Klein with the opportunity to enter a private grammar school and laid the foundation for his admission to the university. His mother was a faithful follower of the Goddess of the Night. She passed away in the same year when Klein entered Hoi University. He also had a brother and a sister living together in the other 2 bedrooms of the apartment. The family was not rich and its conditions could even be described as below average. At the present, the expenses were maintained by his brother who was a clerk at an import and export company. As a graduate in history, Klein had mastered the ancient Fuzak language, which was known as the origin of the characters of the northern continents, as well as Hellenese which often appeared in ancient tombs as it was related to worship and prayer. Hellenese? A thought ran through Zhou Mingrue's mind. He reached out, holding down his painfully throbbing temple and took his eyes to the notebook on the desk. He realized that the line of text on the yellowed paper had turned from strange to unfamiliar, from unfamiliar to familiar. Slowly, it becomes understandable. This was a short sentence written in Hellenese. In dark ink it read, "Everyone will die, including me." Hiss. Zhou Mingrue felt an unknown fear rising in his heart. He instinctively leaned back, as if trying to widen the distance between him and the book. As Zhou was very weak, he almost fell and had to hurriedly reach out to press on the edge of the table. He felt an unseen turbulence in the air around him and he could almost hear whisperings in his ears. It was like the horror stories that old people told him when he was young. Shaking his head, as if everything was just an illusion, Zhou Mingrue regained his steadfastness. He shifted his gaze from his notebook and started panting. At this time, his eyes fell on the shiny brass revolver and a doubt came up in his mind. With Klein's household conditions, how could I afford to buy a revolver? Zhou Mingrue could not help frowning. In his deliberation, he suddenly noticed that the edge of the desk had more than half of a red handprint. The color was deeper than glow of the moon, and it was thicker than the veil. It was handprint in blood. A blood handprint? Zhou Mingrue unconsciously opened the right hand holding the edge of the table. He lowered his head and saw his palms and fingers smeared in blood. At the same time, he felt the tingling pain in his head again. It had weakened slightly but was still continuing. Did I break my head? Zhou Mingrue muttered as he turned to the cracked mirror. After a few steps, he could see the medium build, dark brown pupil of his own figure in the mirror. This is me now, Klein Moretti. Zhou Mingrue paused because the light was not enough in the middle of the night to see clearly. Thus, he continued to move forward until he was only one step away from the mirror. With a veil-like blush of the moonlight, he titled his head and looked at the reflection of his forehead. The mirror clearly reflected an ugly wound entrenching around his temple. The edges of the wound were burnt, with bloodstains all around it. Through the wound, Zhou could see the gray matter of his own brains slowly trembling. TN1, ostensible fondness of something one really fears. What? Zhou Mingrue was frightened by the scene and took a few steps back. It seemed as if Mirror was not showing himself, but a dead body. How could a person with such a severe wound still be alive? He couldn't believe it, but he also tilted his head and checked the other side. Even though the distance was further and the light was blurred, he could still see the existence of the penetrating wound and the deep red stains of blood. This, Zhou Mingrue took a breath and tried to calm himself. He pressed his hand to the left chest and felt the heart's fierce, fast, and vigorous beats. He also touched his own skin. Underneath the slightly cold bare skin was the warmth of his body. After going down and verifying that the knees could bend, Zhou Mingrue stood up again and partially restored his calm. "What's the matter?" he frowned, planning to examine his head again. Going forward 2 steps, he suddenly stopped again, because the luminosity of the moon outside the window was relatively dim. It was not enough for him to perform a thorough observation this matter. A piece of memory came out of his mind, and Zhou Mingrue turned to look at the gray pipe on the wall next to the desk and the wall lamp surrounded by the metal grid. This was the current mainstream gas lamp. The flames were stable and the lighting effect was excellent. Originally, in the case of Klein Moretti's family, not to mention gas lamps, they could not even afford kerosene lamps. The use of candles was more in line with the family's identity and status. 4 years ago, he had to stay up late to study for the Hoi University entrance exam. When he was struggling, his brother Benson believed that this was an important issue concerning the future of the family. Even if he had to borrow money, he must create good study environment for Klein. Of course, Benson, who had been working for years as a literate person, was definitely not a reckless, untactful and inconsiderate person. He used the argument that installing a gas pipeline helped to improve the apartment's grade and attract future leases, to persuade the landlord to pay for the money to complete the basic infrastructure. He also managed to obtain a new gas lamp near the cost price, using his relationships with the other import and export companies. For the whole incident, he only needed to use his savings without the need to borrow money from anyone. The memory fragments flickered. Zhou Mingrue returned to the desk. He opened the pipe valve and twisted the gas light switch. The sound of friction and ignition sounded, but the light did not come as expected. Da-da-da. Zhou Mingrue twisted a few more times, but the gas lamp was still dark. Retracting the hand, holding down the left temple, Zhou Mingrue searched through the memory fragments to find out why. A few seconds later, he turned and walked toward the gate, before the mechanical device that was also set on the wall and with gray-white pipes. This was a gas meter. Looking at the barely worn gears and bearings, Zhou Mingrue took out a coin from his pocket. It is dark yellow in color, flashing in bronze, with a portrait of a man wearing a crown on the front and surrounded by wheat with a number 1. Zhou Mingrue knew that this was the most basic currency of the Kingdom of Ruin. It was called a copper penny. The actual purchasing power of 1 penny was roughly equivalent to the $3 or $4 on Earth. The other types of coins included 5 pence, halfpence, and a quarter. There were 3 kinds of pences, but they are still not comprehensive enough. In everyday life, it was still necessary to mix and match the coins from time to time. Flicking the copper penny, which was only released when King George III became king, on his fingertips, Zhou Mingrue inserted it into the slender opening of the gas meter. Dang! Dang! As pennies fell to the bottom of the meter, the rattling of the gears rang out. A short and wonderful mechanical melody was played. Zhou Mingrue stared at the meter for a few seconds and returned to the wood-colored desk to reach for the gas light switch. Duh! 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 A cluster of flames ignited and quickly grew. The bright light first occupied the interior of the wall lamp, then it passed through the transparent glass and the room was covered with brightness. The darkness suddenly receded, and the crimson blush disappeared through the window. Zhou Mingrue was relieved by a little and quickly walked to the dressing mirror. This time, He carefully examined the position of his temple and noticed the details. After several comparisons, he discovered that apart from the initial bloodstains, there was no blood flowing out of the wounds anymore. It was as if they had obtained the best hemostasis and bandages, and the slowly wriggling gray brain and wounds grew at a visible speed. At this rate, it would take 30 to 40 minutes, or perhaps 2 or 3 hours, where there would be only traces of shallow marks on the skin. Therapeutic effect from crossing over. Zhou Mingrui tilted his right mouth corner and whispered. Then he exhaled slowly and sighed. No matter what, at least he would be alive. Setting down the mind, Zhou Mingrui pulled the drawer and retrieved a small piece of soap. He also took one of the old towels hanging from the side of the cabinet. Then he opened the door and walked to the toilet shared by the tenant on the second floor. Well, the blood on the head had to be dealt with, so as not to look like a crime scene. It would scare myself and also my sister Melissa when she wakes up in the morning. That would not be a good situation. The corridor outside the door was dark. There was only some moonlight sprinkling through the windows at the end of the corridor. The moonlight barely outlined the contours of the protruding objects, making them look like pairs of monster eyes that silently watched the living people on a deep night. Zhou Mingrui was a little scared as he walked lightly towards the bathroom. Inside the bathroom, the moonlight was more plentiful and everything became clear. Zhou Mingrui stood in front of the washstand and unscrewed the tap. At the sound of the water, he suddenly remembered the landlord Franck. As water was included in the motley rent, Franck, a small, thin man wearing top hat, inner vest and black jacket, would actively visit several toilets to eavesdrop on the sound of the taps. If the tap's movements are louder, Mr. Franch would disregard his gentlemanly manner. He would fiercely wield his cane, hit the door of the bathroom and shout, "Damn thief! A waste is a shameful thing. I remember you. Let me see it once again, and take your dirty luggage out. Trust me, this is the most cost-effective apartment in Fullington and you will never find a landlord more generous than me." Regaining his thoughts, Zhou Mingrui wetted the towel and cleaned the blood from his face, over and over again. Checking through the shattered mirror in the washroom and confirming that there were only wound marks, Zhou Mingrui relaxed a little. He took off his linen shirt and used the soap to rub off the blood stains. At this time, he frowned and remembered that there may be other problems. The wounds were huge and blood stains were numerous. Therefore, in addition to the body, there should be traces of blood in the room. After a few minutes, Zhou Mingrui cleaned his flax shirt, took a wet towel and walked back to his apartment. He wiped the blood handprint on the desk first and then he relied on the gas light to find other residues. This allowed him to discover that there were a lot of splattered blood spots on the floor and at the bottom of the desk. There was also a dark yellow bullet shell on the floor near the left-hand wall. Pointing the revolver against the temple to fire a shot. Connecting the horrifying leads together, Zhou Mingrui finally understood Klein's cause of death. He did not rush to verify, but first attentively wiped out the blood mark. After that he took the shell and went back to the desk, opened the revolver to the left, poured out the bullet inside. Oh, a total of 5 bullets, a cartridge case, all made of brass. Sure enough, Zhou Mingrui looked at the empty bullet shell and nodded slightly as he slew the wheel of the revolver. He shifted his gaze to the left and looked at the phrase, "All people will die, including me," which was written in the open notebook. More doubts followed. Where did the gun come from? Suicide, or murder disguised as suicide? What troubles could a peasant-born history graduate get involved with? How did the suicidal act leave only a blood mark? Was it because I transmigrated and brought some healing benefits? Sinking in thoughts, Zhou Mingrui changed into another linen shirt, sat down on a chair, and started thinking about more important things. Klein's experience was still not the focus of his concern. The real problem is to figure out why he transmigrated. Could he cross over back to Earth? Parents, relatives, buddies, friends, interesting internet world, various delicious foods. These were all the reasons that you want to go back. Zhou Mingrue's right hand unconsciously throws out the pistol wheel and gathers it back again and again. Well, nothing unusual has happened recently. Just that I was a little down on luck. How could it lead to a transmigration? Unlucky. Yeah, I did a luck conversion ritual before dinner tonight. A flash of lightning crossed Zhou Mingrue's mind, illuminating the memory he had been obscured by the fog. As a qualified keyboard politician, keyboard historian, keyboard economist, keyboard biologist, keyboard folklorist, he had always claimed to understand a bit of everything, and of course, the buddies often laugh at it as a jack of all trades. And alchemy was one of them. Last year I went back to my hometown and found a copy of the Ancient Rituals of the Qin and Han Dynasties, in the old book stall. It seemed very interesting at first and I felt that it was helpful to show off on the internet. So I bought it back, but unfortunately, the interest came quickly and left quickly. The vertical proses of the old books made people feel bored. I just turned through the beginning pages and threw the book into a corner. It was until the last month of continuous bad luck, lost mobile phones, customers running away, work mistakes, bad things came round that he remembered that there was a luck conversion ritual at the beginning of the book and the requirements were extremely simple, without any cultivation requirements. Just take the staple food in your area and make 4 portions in 4 corners of the room. They can be on the table, cupboard, etc., then you stand in the center of the room and take 4 steps counterclockwise in a square. The first step is to meditate silently, blessings of Xian Huang, 1, Immortal Lord, the second step meditate, blessings of Xian Huang Heavenly Master, the third step meditate, blessings of Xian Huang Deity, the fourth step meditation, blessings of Xian Huang Heavenly Lord. After the walk, close your eyes, wait patiently for 5 minutes. The ceremony will be successful. Holding the attitude of free to try, he pulled out the book himself and did it before dinner in accordance with requirements. However, nothing happened at that time. Who knew, by midnight, he had actually transmigrated. Transmigration. This was definitely because of the luck conversion ritual. Well, I will try it here tomorrow. If it's really the reason, then I would have hopes to go back. Zhou Mingrue stopped shaking the revolver and sat upright. Regardless, I would have to try it. To regard a dead horse as an alive horse to treat. 2. Tian notes. 1. Xian Huang, literally Xian means black and Huang means yellow, it signifies the heaven and earth in ancient Chinese. 2. This means we know very clearly that things are impossible, incurable, there's no hope about it, but we still do our best. Having confirmed his plan, Zhou Mingrue immediately found calmness in his mind. The feelings of fear, uncertainty, and insecurity retreated back into a corner. Until this time, he was finally in a mood to carefully examine the remnants of Klein's memories. Zhou Mingrue got up habitually, closed the pipe valve and watched the wall lamp slowly dimmed until it went out. Then he sat down again, while subconsciously rubbing the brass wheel and holding the head of the revolver. He sat quietly in the dyed red ambience, slowly feeling the aftertaste. He felt almost like a focused audience in the movie theater. Perhaps influenced by the passage of the bullet, Klein's memory was like a broken glass. Not only was it losing continuity, but also obviously missing contents in many places. For example, where did the exquisite revolver pistol came from? Was it a suicide or murder? In the notebook, what did the phrase, "everyone will die, including me," meant? He did not participate in any strange activities in the days before the incident. Not only did these specific memories become fragmented and broken, it was the same with his acquired knowledge. According to the current status of his mind, Zhou Mingrue believed that if Klein returned to university, he would not be able to complete his studies. However, in actual fact he had only left the campus a few days ago. 2 days later, attend an interview at the Department of History at the University of Tingent. The universities in the Ruined Kingdom have a tradition where graduates do not stay in their own school. His tutor at Hoi University gave him a recommendation letter for Tingent University and another letter for the University of Beckland. Zhou Mingrue silently watched his memories. The red moon shifted westward from the window and gradually sank until there was a slight light in the east. The horizon became stained with gold color rays. At this time, there was a movement in the room and soon the sound of footsteps appeared next to the isolation door. Melissa woke up. She was really on time, as always. Zhou Mingrue smiled as he was affected by Klein's memories. He had a feeling of seeing his own sister in Melissa. Previously, I did not have a sister, he immediately uttered a sentence. Melissa was different from Benson and Klein. Her primary education was not completed at the Sunday school of the Church for the Goddess of the Night. When she was of age for school, the Kingdom of Ruin enacted the Basic Education Law and established the Secondary and Primary Education Committee. It specifically provided funding to increase investment for education. In less than 3 years ago, under the premise that numerous church schools were incorporated, many public elementary schools were established to strictly maintain the principle of religious neutrality. They would not involve in the conflicts between the Lord of Storms, the Goddess of the Night, and the God of Steam and Machinery. Compared with the Sunday school where only 1 copper penny was used every week, the public elementary school's tuition fees were rather expensive at 3 pence a week. However, the former only provided 1 day of learning a week on Sundays, whereas the latter had 6 days of classes in 1 week. From the perspective of prices, it seemed almost free. Melissa was different from most girls. She liked gears, clockwork, bearings and other things since childhood and she was determined to be a steam mechanic. The elder brother Benson, who had suffered a lack of learning and understood the importance of education, fully supported Melissa's dream just as he supported Klein's college education. After all, the Tingen Technical School was only a secondary education institution and students did not need to come from a grammar school or a public school. In July of last year, Melissa passed the entrance exam when she was 15. She realized her dream of becoming a member of the Steam and Machinery department at the Tingen Technical School. The weekly tuition fees had also increased to 9 pence. At the same time, the import and export company that Benson worked at was affected by the situation in the southern continent. Both profits and business deals had shrunk dramatically. The company had to lay off more than 1/3 of the staffs. In order to keep his job, Benson had to accept more arduous tasks, often working overtime and traveling to places where the environment was harsh. Therefore, he was out in the past 2 days. Klein had thought about helping his elder brother, but he was also born as a peasant and was admitted to an ordinary grammar school. When he entered college, he strongly felt his own lackingness. For example, the ancient Fuzak was the source language of all the nations of the North Continent. For the children of the aristocrats or the wealthy class, it was something that they would learn from a young age. Yet Klein did not come into contact with it until he was in the university. In many other similar aspects, Klein almost had to exhaust all his energy, often staying up late at night only to barely catch up with others and graduate with a moderate result. The memories of the brother and sister passed through Zhou Mingrue's mind until the knob of the door turned and the door frame creaked open slowly. He suddenly woke up and remembered that he was still holding a revolver in his hand. This is a semi-regulated item. It will scare children. Also, there is a wound on my head. Seeing that Melissa was about to come out, Zhou Mingrue quickly opened the desk drawer while holding down his temple. He dropped the revolver into the drawer with a bang. What happened? Melissa heard the motion and looked up in confusion. She was in the most youthful stage. Even if she did not have a very nutritious diet, her face was thin, slightly pale and her skin was still full of luster, giving off the air of a young girl. Seeing her sister's brown eyelids exploring and looking, Zhou Mingrue calmed down and picked an object close to his hand. Then he closed the drawer and concealed the existence of the revolver. The feeling of the other hand on his temple made him determine that the wound had healed. He had grabbed a silver-white vine-leaf pocket watch from the drawer. He pressed lightly on the top of the pocket and its cover flicked open. It was the most valuable item left by the sergeant of the Royal Army, who was also the father of the three of them. However, it was after all a second-hand good. Over the recent years, it had caused problems from time to time. Even when was repaired by watchmakers, the problems remained. Benson, who had in many occasions embarrassed himself with the watch, had determinedly left it at home. It must be said that Melissa might have had a mechanical talent. After mastering the theoretical knowledge, she began to use the tools from the technical school to play around with the pocket watch. She had recently even claimed to have repaired it. Zhou Mingrui watched the open cover and saw that the second's hand stopped motionless. He subconsciously turned the top and intended to win the watch. However, after he twisted a few laps, he still could not hear the sound of the gearings and the second's hand remained motionless. It looks like it's broken. He tried to find something to say as he looked at his sister. Melissa glanced at him without expression, hurried over and took away the pocket watch. She stood in the same place and pulled up the button on the top of the pocket watch. After only a few turns, there was a throbbing sound of the second hand moving around. Normally speaking, it should need to adjust for time, right? Zhou Mingrui's expression suddenly becomes sluggish. Right at this time, the bells of the cathedral in the distance came in. There were 6 chimes in a row. It sounded ancient and ethereal. Melissa tilted her head and listened. She pulled up the button at the top of the pocket watch, followed by a continuous twist and corrected the time. "It's done," she said briefly, without a little emotion, and then pressed back to the top and returned the pocket watch to Zhou Mingrui. Zhou Mingrui smiled awkwardly without losing politeness. Melissa took a deep look at her brother and turned to the cabinet. She took her toothbrush, towels and other items and made her way out to the public washroom. What was her detest and helpless expression for? Showing empathy for a retarded brother? Zhou Mingrui shook his head and smiled. Pa. Duh. He closed the cover of the watch. Pa. Duh. He slammed it open. Repeating this kind of action, he became engaged in thoughts. Klein committed suicide without a silencer on the gun. For the time being, let's say he committed suicide. The sound the gunshot would have been loud. Yet, Melissa, who was sleeping a wall away, was completely unaware of it. Was she sleeping too well? Or was Klein's suicide shrouded in mysteries? Pa. Open. Pa. Close. Melissa came back from washing and saw the unconscious movement of his brother, who kept opening and closing the lid of the pocket watch. Her eyes were once again mixed with frustration, and she said in a sweet voice, "Klein, please take out the rest of the bread. Remember to buy new ones today, as well as meat and peas. You are going to participate in the interview. I will cook lamb with peas." While she was uttering, she moved the stove out of the corner and made a pot of hot water through the use of charcoal. Before the water boiled, she opened the bottom drawer of the cabinet and took out a can of inferior tea. Looking at the can as if it was a treasure, she reluctantly threw 10 leaves into the pot, pretending that it was real tea. With 2 big cups. Melissa and Zhou Mingrui had tea and shared 2 pieces of rye breads. There was no mixed wood chips nor too much gluten, yet it was still not delicious. Zhou Mingrui was now weak and hungry. He relied on the tea to help swallowing the bread while complaining about the food in his mind. After a few minutes, Melissa finished eating. She adjusted the black hair hanging down her waistcoat and looked at Zhou Mingrui. "Remember to buy new bread. We only need 8 pounds. The weather is hot, too much bread will spoil quickly. And also remember the lamb and peas. Is it really about caring for a nerdy brother?" She needed to emphasize it again. Zhou Mingrui smiled and nodded. "Okay. Regarding 1 pound of the Kingdom of Ruin, Zhou Mingrui believes that it was close to 0.5 kilograms, based on Klein's measurable memory and his own comparison." Melissa didn't say anything more. She tidied up the table and packed the last piece of bread for lunch. She also put on the old shabby cap that was passed down by her late mother. She then picked up her self-sewed school bag and was ready to go out. Today was not Sunday. She had a full day of classes. It was a 50 minutes walk from this apartment to Tingent Technical School. There was also a public carriage, 1 kilometer for 1 penny, with a maximum limit of 4 pence in the city and 6 pence on the outskirts of the city. Melissa wanted to save money by moving out early and walking. As she was opening the door, she paused and turned halfway. "Klein, don't buy too much lambs and peas. Benson may have to wait for Sunday before he can come back. Well, do also remember that we only need 8 pounds of bread." "Okay, good." Zhou Mingrui answered helpless. At the same time, he silently repeated the word Sunday several times. In the northern continent, the year was also divided into 12 months, which ranged from 365 days to 366 days a year. There were also 7 days a week. The former was the results of astronomy, and Zhou Mingrui suspected that it was a parallel world. The latter came from religion because there were 7 orthodox gods in the northern continent: the eternal blazing sun, the Lord of storms, the god of knowledge and wisdom, the goddess of the night, the mother of earth, the god of war, and the god of steam and machinery. Watching his sister close the door, Zhou Mingrui sighed suddenly and quickly turned his mind to the luck conversion ritual. "Sorry, I really want to go home." Zhou Mingrui sat on the chair until the church bells in the distance resounded. After 7 consecutive chimes, he stood up slowly and strolled to the front of the cabinet to take out his clothes. A black vest, a same-color suit, a pair of slightly tight trousers, and a half-topped hat. The clothes gave a scholarly touch. As Zhou Mingrui looked at himself in the mirror, he felt as if he was watching a British drama about Victorian stories. "I am not going to the interview. I am just buying groceries and preparing the materials for the luck conversion ritual." Suddenly, he muttered and shook his head. Klein had been so concerned with the upcoming interview that it became a physical instinct. Whenever his attention was not there, he would habitually put on his only set of decent clothing. With a sigh of relief, Zhou Mingrui took off his formal suit and vest and put on a brownish-yellow coat. The top of his head was changed to a felt hat with a rounded edge. He packed himself up and paced to the side of the bed. He lifted the upper cushion, stretched his hand through an unnoticeable hole at the bottom, groped, and found the concealed space. When his right hand retracted, he had a few pieces of notes in his palm. There were about 7 or 8 notes, and their color was a faded dark green. This was Benson's current savings. It even included the living expenses for the next 3 days. It contained 2 5-sul notes and the rest were 1 sul notes. In Kingdom of Ruin's currency system, sul belonged to the second level. It originated from ancient silver coins, and 1 sul equal to 12 copper pence. Both the 1 sul and 5 sul denominations existed in the market. At the top of the currency system was the gold pound, which was also a part of the banknotes, but it was guaranteed by gold and was pegged directly. A gold pound was equal to 20 sul, with 1 pound, 5 pounds and 10 pounds denominated bank notes. Zhou Mingrui spread out the folded banknotes and he smelled a very light and minuscule scent of special oil ink. It was the scent of money. Maybe it was because of Klein's memory fragmentation, or perhaps his own desire for money that had never changed. Zhou Mingrui felt that he had fallen in love with these little things. Well, their designs were so beautiful that even the picture of George III with his 2 mustaches and old-fashioned looks, had appeared to be so cute. Alas, the watermark that was visible under the sun was tempting as well. It was the well-designed anti-counterfeiting label that made it distinct from counterfeit notes. After half a minute of appreciation, Zhou Mingrui took out 2 notes of 1 sul, re-rolled the rest and stuffed it back into the hidden space inside the mattress. After smoothing the cloth near the hole, Zhou Mingrui took out the 2 banknotes and folded it neatly. He put them into the pocket on the left side of the brown-yellow jacket so that they were separated from the pennies in the pocket of his trousers. After all these, he placed the key into his right pocket, took a large, dark brown paper bag and walked towards the door. "Tud, Tud, the footsteps went from fast to slow and eventually stopped. Zhou Mingrue paused by the door, his brows had subconsciously raised. There were many mysteries surrounding Klein's suicide. If he were to just go out like this, would he meet with any accidents? After a moment of contemplation, Zhou Mingrue returned to the desk. He opened the drawer and took out the shiny brass revolver. This was the only self-defense weapon he could think of. It was also a powerful enough weapon. Although he had never practiced shooting before, he could still pull out the pistol and it would at least be enough to scare people. Caressing the cold metal of the revolver, Zhou Mingrue stuffed it into the pocket where the banknotes were and he clutched the money with his palm. With his fingers on the pistol, it would be perfectly hidden. A sense of security rose. Yet, as someone who knew a little of everything, Zhou had other worries. Will it accidentally discharges around? After thinking for a while, Zhou Mingrue quickly came to a solution. He took out his pistol and flicked the wheel out to the left, turning the chamber vacated by suicide bullet to the position to be hit and then slammed it together. In this way, even if there is an accidental discharge, it will only be a blank round. Rearranging the pistol, Zhou Mingrue's kept his left hand in his pocket and did not intend to take it out anymore. He pressed the hat with his right hand and opened the door in a clang. The corridor during the day was still dark as limited sunlight could penetrate from the windows. Zhou Mingrue quickly walked down the stairs. When he left the apartment, he immediately felt the splendor and warmth of the sun. Although it was July and close to the midsummer, Tengen was located in the north of the Kingdom of Ruin and had unique climatic characteristics. The highest temperature in a year was less than 30 degrees Celsius on Earth. It was also generally cool in the early morning. There were some places in the streets that were wet, dirty and clustered with unwanted goods. In the memory of Klein, those were where the low-income class lived. Even if there were sewers, similar scenes were never rare, because there were too many people trying to live. Come and try, we have delicious baked fish. Hot and fresh oyster soup, take a cup in the morning and have a full day of spirit. Fresh fish from the port for only 5 pence. Muffins, squid soup with ginger beer. Conch for sale. Vegetables harvested from the farm outside the city this morning. They are cheap and fresh. The street vendors selling vegetables, fruits, and cooked food shouted loudly, beckoning passengers in a hurry. Some of them stopped and carefully compared the goods, while others waved their hands impatiently because today's work had not been found yet. Zhou Mingrue smelled the various stenches and aromas in the air that were coming and going. His left hand held the gun handle firmly and tightened the grip on the banknotes. The right hand pressed the felt-tip hat and bent slightly to walk down the busy street. There would be thieves in the places where there were many people, especially in this neighborhood where there were many poor and unemployed people doing temporary work as well as hungry children manipulated by adults. All the way forward, when the density of the crowd returned to normal, Zhou straightened his back. He raised his head and looked at the streets. There was a wandering accordionist who was playing music. The melody was pleasant and warm. He was also surrounded by a group of children dressed in ragged and ugly clothes. They looked malnourished and sallow. They listened to music, followed the beats, twisted their bodies according to their instincts and danced their own dances. Their faces were filled with joy, just as if they were little princes and little angels. A woman with numb expression walked past, her skirt was dirty and her skin was dull. Her eyes were dull and sluggish. Only when she looked at the group of children, did she flash a little spark as she almost saw herself 30 years ago. Zhou Mingrue surpassed her and turned to another street, stopping in front of Smiren's bakery. The owner of the bakery was a 70-year-old grandmother called Wendy Smiren. Her hair was gray and her face was always filled with a mild smile. As far as Klein could remember, she had always been selling bread and pastries here. Her baked tengen cake and lemon cake are very tasty. Zhou Mingrue swallowed his saliva and smiled. Mrs. Smiren, 8 pounds of rye bread. Oh, little Klein, has Benson come back yet? Wendy asked, smiling. He will still need a few days. Zhou Mingrui answered vaguely. Wendy grabbed the rye bread while sighing. He is a very hard-working guy and he will have a good wife. Speaking of this, her mouth rose, laughing slightly and mischievously. Now that you have graduated, our Hoi University history student. Well, you will soon start to make money. So you should not live in such an apartment any longer. At least, you should get a place with individual bathrooms. Mrs. Smyron, you are like a young and lively lady today. Zhou Mingrui could only respond with a dry chuckle. If Klein could successfully pass the interview and become a lecturer at the University of Tengen, the entire family would indeed go straight to a well-off condition. From his memory fragment, he had even imagined renting a suburban bungalow house with 5 or 6 rooms upstairs, 2 bathroom rooms, a large balcony, 2 rooms downstairs, a dining room, a living room, a kitchen, a washroom, and an underground storage room. This was not a luxury. Even a probational lecturer at the University of Tengen could earn 2 gold pounds a week. After receiving an official offer, it would be 3 gold pounds and 10 soul. After all, Klein's brother Benson, who had been working for several years, could only have a weekly salary of 1 pound 10 soul. A factory's ordinary workers would earn even less than a pound or perhaps just a little more. The rent for a single-family house would range from 19 soul to 1 pound 18 soul. This is the difference between earning $3,000 or $4,000 a month versus earning $14,000 to $15,000 a month, Zhou Mingrui secretly muttered. However, the premise of all this was to be able to pass the interview at the University of Tengen or Beckerland University. There were not many other opportunities. People with no background would not be recommended to become government officers. Furthermore, as a student in history, the scope of employment was even narrower than others. There was also not much demand for private consultants from aristocrats, bankers, or industrial tycoons. Taking into account that Klein's knowledge had also become fragmented, incomplete and broken, Zhou Mingrui could only regard Mrs. Smyron's expectations with some awkwardness and guilt. No, I've always been so youthful, Wendy answered humorously. In the middle of the dialogue, she had loaded 16 pieces of dark rye bread which Zhou Mingrui had weighed into the dark brown large paper bags that he brought along. 9 pence. Each rye bread weighed about 0.5 pounds and small deviations were inevitable. 9 pence, didn't you ask for 11 pence 2 days ago? Asked Zhou Mingrui, subconsciously. Last month it was 15 pence. You have to thank the people who marched on the street for the repeal of the Grain Act. Wendy laughed while spreading both hands. Zhou Mingrui could vaguely understand this and he nodded. As Klein's memory was somewhat crippled, he could only remember that the core of the Grain Act was to protect the prices of domestic agricultural products. Before the price rose to a certain extent, it was not allowed to import grain products from the southern Veneto, Mason, Lauenburg and other countries. Why did some people want to march on the street to protest against it? Without saying much, Zhou Mingrui was afraid to accidentally take out the revolver. So he could only squish the notes carefully, taking out one of them and handing it to Mrs. Smyron. After receiving 3 copper pennies as change and stuffing them into the trousers pockets, he took the paper bag containing the pieces of bread and walked towards the lettuce and meat market across the street. He would try to obtain the meat for his sister's stew mutton with peas. There was a municipal square at the intersection of the Iron Cross Street and the Daffodil Street. At this time, there were a number of tents being set up. There were clowns with funny costumes distributing leaflets. Tomorrow evening, circus performance. Zhou Mingrui glanced at the flyers in the hands of others and whispered the contents. Melissa will definitely like it, but I don't know how to collect tickets. With a flash of thoughts, Zhou Mingrui moved closer to the clowns. He was just about to ask one of the clowns in red and yellow costumes when suddenly he heard a hoarse female voice from the side. Would you like to try a divination? Subconsciously turning his head, Zhou Mingrui saw a woman wearing a black pointed hat and a dark dress standing in front of a low tent. Her face was smeared with red and yellow paint while her eyes were gray, blue and profound. No. Zhou Mingrui shook his head to answer, he did not have the spare cash for a diviner. The woman laughed and smiled. My tarot divination is very accurate. Tarot. Zhou Mingrui was immediately stunned. This pronunciation was very similar to tarot on Earth. The tarot cards on Earth was a kind of fortune-telling poker, but they were more graphic cards, with symbolic pictures. And then he suddenly remembered the origin of tarot's divination in this world. It did not originate from 7 orthodox gods nor was it an ancient legacy. However, it was invented by Russell Gustav, who was the Archon of the Republic of Intis more than 170 years ago. Mr. Russell invented the steam engine, improved the sailing boat, overthrew the rule of the Kingdom of Intis. He was also recognized by the God of Craftsmanship Church and became the first Archon of the Republic of Intis. Later, he invaded the various other parts of the world and took in Lauenburg and other countries under his protection. This allowed the kingdoms of Rouen, Veneto, and the Vorzak Empire to bow down to the strengths of Intis. He then changed the Republic to an empire, claiming to be the Great Caesar. It was during Russell's reign that the God of Craftsmanship Church received the first public revelation since the Fifth Era. It formally changed the title God of Craftsmanship to God of Steam and Machinery. Russell also invented tarot divination and established the playstyles of the contemporary card games. There were several types that Zhou Mingrui was familiar with, including Upgrade, Fighting Landlord, Texas Poker and Quint. In addition, he had also sent a fleet that discovered a route to the southern continent through the stormy and turbulent seas. This set the beginning of the era of colonialism. Unfortunately, after Russell became old, he was betrayed. In 1198 of the Fifth Era, he was assassinated by the Church of Eternal Blazing Sun, the formal royal family of Intis, the Sauron family, and other nobles. He had later died in the White Maple Palace. Remembering these common pieces of knowledge, Zhou Mingrui suddenly had a little toothache. Is this a transmigration, senior? With these thoughts in mind, Zhou Mingrui had an urge to see what the tarot cards looked like. He then nodded to the woman with the pointed hat and a painted face. If the price is reasonable, I will give it a try. The woman laughed immediately. Sir, you are the first person to come for divination today. It will be free of charge. Free. Free things could also turn out to be the most expensive. Zhou Mingrui silently muttered to himself. He was determined to firmly reject whatever additional services that might be provided. If you are really that good, divine my transmigrator identity then. While in thoughts, Zhou Mingrui followed the woman wearing red and yellow paint on her face and stooped down to enter a low tent. The inside of the tent was so dark that only a small amount of light infiltrated and dimly revealed a table full of cards. The woman with the pointed hat did not seem to be affected by the darkness at all. Her black dress swirled across the table like water. She sat down on the opposite side and lit up a candle. A fuzzy yellow flame swayed and the inside of the tent was faintly lit up. The place now looked much more mysterious. Zhou Mingrui sat down quietly. His eyes swept over the tarot cards on the table and realized that he was familiar with the Magician, the Emperor, the Hanged Man, Temperance, and the other main cards. It seemed that Russell was really a senior from Earth. Zhou Mingrui's mouth was slightly open. He did not have the time to finish checking through cards that were turned upwards. The woman who had claimed to be an accurate diviner reached out and shoved all the tarot cards together into a pile. She pushed it in front of Zhou. I will need you to shuffle the cards and cut the deck. The circus diviner said in a low hoarse voice. I need to shuffle. Zhou Mingrui asked subconsciously. The oil paint on the diviner's face moved and she revealed a slight smile. Of course, everyone's fate can only be divined by themselves. I'm just an interpreter. Zhou Mingrui was immediately alerted. Are there any extra charges for interpretation? As a keyboard warrior, I have seen too many similar tricks. The fortune teller was obviously stunned for a moment before she finally murmured. It's free. Zhou Mingrui calmed down, he pushed the revolver deeper into his pocket. Then he calmly extended his hands and skillfully shuffled the cards. I'm done. He placed the shuffled deck of tarot cards in the center of the table. The diviner crossed her hands and attentively studied the deck for a few moments. Suddenly, she spoke. Sorry, I forget to ask, what do you want to divine about? While dating his first love in the past, Zhou Mingrui had also learned about the tarot. Therefore, he answered without hesitation. The past, the present, and the future. This was a kind of divination method for tarot cards. 3 cards would be lined up in order to symbolize the past, the present, and the future. The diviner nodded and the corners of her mouth curled up, revealing a smile. In that case, please shuffle your cards again. Only when you understand what you want to ask, then you can obtain the truly symbolic cards. You are playing with me, right? Do not be so stingy. Is it a revenge just because I keep stressing the free service? Zhou's face twisted slightly. He took a deep breath, took back the tarot cards, shuffled them and cut the deck. Is there a problem this time? He placed the cards in the center of the table. No. The diviner raised her finger, picked up the card from the top and placed it on the left side of Zhou Mingrui. She continued in a low husky voice. This symbolizes the past. This symbolizes the present. The diviner placed the second card directly in front of Zhou Mingrui. She picked up the third card and placed it on the right side of Zhou Mingrui. This symbolizes the future. Well, which card do you like to see first? After all these actions, the diviner raised her head and gazed deeply into Zhou Mingrui with her gray-blue eyes. Let's look at the present first. Zhou Mingrui said after thinking slightly. The diviner slowly nodded and flipped the card in front of him. This card depicted a young man dressed in gorgeous clothes, wearing a ragged headdress, carrying a staff on his shoulders, with a bag hanging on end of the staff and a little white dog following behind him. The serial number was 0. The Fool. The diviner whispered the name of the card, her gray and blue eyes stared at Zhou Mingrui. The Fool. Tarot's number 0. A beginning. A beginning of unlimited possibilities. Zhou Mingrui could not even be considered to be a part-time tarot enthusiast. Yet, based on his limited understanding, he was able to make a superficial interpretation. Just as the diviner was about to open her mouth, the tent's linen curtains were suddenly lifted and the strong lights of the sun poured into the tent. It was so glaring that even Zhou Mingrui, whose back was facing the entrance, had to instinctively narrow his eyes. How dare you pretend to be me again? Giving people divination is my job. A female voice was mad and furious. Get out. You need to remember that you are only an animal trainer. An animal trainer? Zhou Mingrui's eyes adapted to the light and saw another woman standing at the entrance. She was also wearing a pointed hat with black dress and red-yellow paint on her face. The difference was that she was taller and had a more slender figure. The woman sitting in front of him quickly stood up and said apologetically. Please don't mind, this is just my hobby. Although, I have to say, sometimes my divination and interpretation can be quite accurate, really. She lifted her skirt, bypassed the table from the side and quickly left the tent. Sir, would you like me to interpret it for you? The real diviner looked at Zhou Mingrui and asked with a smile. Zhou Mingrui opened his mouth and asked sincerely. Is it free? No. The real diviner replied. Forget it. Zhou Mingrui inserted his hand back into his pocket. He held down the revolver and the notes and stooped out of the tent. What the heck? I've received a divination from an animal trainer. An animal trainer who doesn't aspire to be a diviner will not make a good clown. Zhou Mingrui soon put this matter behind his mind. He spent 7 pence on the lettuce and meat market and bought a pound of average quality mutton. He also bought the grocery items such as green peas, cabbage, onions, and potatoes. Together with the bread, he had spent 25 copper pennies or 2 sul 1 penny. The money is used so quickly, poor Benson. Zhou Mingrui had not only finished the 2 notes he brought but also a penny from his own pocket too. After sighing, he stopped thinking about it and hurried back home. With the staple food, I can carry out the luck conversion ritual. While waiting for tenants on the second floor to leave, Zhou Mingrui did not rush to perform the ritual. Instead, he translated the words, "Blessings of Xian Huang Immortal Lord," into ancient Fusac and Ruanese language. If the spell did not work, he would try a different language on another day. After all, we must consider the difference between the worlds. When in Rome, do as the Romans do. As for the Hellenese texts that were used in ancient prayers and sacrifices, Zhou Mingrui could not complete the translation because of his insufficient vocabulary. After doing all this, he took out 4 pieces of rye bread from the paper bag. He put one at the corner where the coal stove was originally placed, one underneath the bottom of the mirror, one on the top of the cupboard where the 2 walls meet, and one near the junk items beside the desk. Taking a deep breath, Zhou Mingrui came to the center of the room. He calmed himself down for a few minutes before he solemnly walked counterclockwise in a square. Taking the first step, he whispered, "Blessings of Xian Huang Immortal Lord." In the second step, he meditated, "Blessings of Xian Huang Heavenly Master." The third step, Zhou Mingrui breathlessly whispered, "Blessings of Xian Huang Deity." In the fourth step, he breathed out and said silently in his mind, "Blessings of Xian Huang Heavenly Lord." After returning to the starting point, Zhou Mingrui closed his eyes and waited for the results. His heart full of anticipation, anxiousness, hope, and panic. Can I go back? Will it be effective? Will any accidents happen? The darkness before his eyes was dyed in the dark red of sun. Zhou Mingrui's thoughts flocked in his mind and were difficult to subside. At this moment, he suddenly felt that the air around him seemed to stop flowing, becoming thick and mysterious. Immediately afterward, his ears started ringing with disjointed sounds. They were sometimes sharp, sometimes illusory, sometimes tempting, sometimes arrogant, sometimes it was the whispers of a mad man. Though he obviously couldn't understand what the whispers were about, Zhou Mingrui couldn't help but try to listen and differentiate. His head was sore again as if there was a steel rod drilling into it. Zhou Mingrui felt that his head was about to explode and his thoughts became stained with psychedelic colors. He knew something was wrong and tried hard to open his eyes, but he could not complete this simple action. The whole body became more rigid and tense as if it would break at any time. Zhou Mingrui inexplicably developed a self-deprecating thought. Knows wa no die, one, just as he could no longer bear it anymore and the string in his mind was about to break, the numerous voices and whispered retreated. The surroundings became very quiet and the atmosphere was whimsical. Not only the atmosphere, Zhou felt that his body was equally whimsical. He tried again to blink and open his eyes. This time it was very easy. A stretch of diffused fog appeared in his eyes. It was bleary, vague, and boundless. What is happening? Zhou stared blankly. He lowered his head and found himself floating in an area of fog, an area so huge that the fog seemed endless. The fog, which was almost like water, was dotted with many crimson little stars. Some of them were large, some were small, some were hidden deeply, and some were floating on the surface. Looking at the holographical scene, Zhou Mingrui, in a semi-experimental and semi-exploration state, extended his right hand to reach a crimson star floating near him on the right surface. He wanted to try and find a way to leave this place. Just as his fingers came into contact with the surface of the star, water lines suddenly emerged from his body. The crimson star bursted like an illusory firework. Zhou was shocked. In panic, he tried to retract his hand but it accidentally touched another crimson star. Thus, that star also started to glow brilliantly. For a moment, Zhou felt that his mind was empty and his energy was depleted. Beckland, the capital of Ruined Kingdom, Queen's District, a luxury villa. Audrey Hall was sitting in front of the dressing table, her fingers gently stroking an ancient bronze mirror with a cracked surface. "Mirror, mirror, wake up now, in the name of the Hall family, I command you to wake up." She changed her expression again and again, but the mirror did not respond. After 10 minutes, she finally gave up, grumbled and whispered. "Dad was really lying to me. He had always told me that this mirror was a treasure that belonged to the Dark Emperor of the ancient Solomon Empire and that it was an extraordinary item." Before she could finish her sentence, the bronze mirror placed on the table suddenly bursted with deep red lights which engulfed her immediately. In the Sea of Sunia, a three-mast sailboat that was clearly outdated was cutting through the waves in the middle of a storm. Alger Wilson stood on the deck. His body swayed up and down with the ship's movements, yet he could easily maintain his balance. He was wearing a robe embroidered with patterns of lightning and he held a weirdly shaped glass bottle in his hand. The inside of the bottle was for a moment fizzy with bubbles, in the next moment it became the frosty with snow, and later it was windy with scratch marks. "I still need the blood of a ghost shark," Alger whispered. At this moment, a deep red light erupted between the glass bottle and his palm. It engulfed the surroundings immediately. Above an endless stretch of gray and white fog, Audrey Hall came to her senses. She looked around in panic and confusion. Diagonally across, she noticed the man with a blurred head and fuzzy figure performing the same actions. Almost immediately, they discovered that not too far away in the distance, there was another mysterious man who was covered in gray mist. The mysterious man, Zhou, was equally shocked. "Your Excellency, where is this place? What do you want to do?" Audrey and Alger were stunned, they kept silent for a moment before speaking together in unison. "Tn1, knows wa no die, Chinese meme, to make trouble out of nothing." Both of them spoke in Ruinese language, with similarly tense and anxious emotions. "Where is this place? What am I trying to do? I would like to know the answers as well." Zhou Mingrue calmed himself down and silently repeated these two questions. What left the deepest impression on him were not the sentences of the questions, nor the meaning of the words. Rather, it was the panic, vigilance, fear, and awe that the man and the woman showed. In an unexplainable way, he had transferred two people into the world of gray fogs. Even as the initiator himself, he was awestruck and shocked, let alone the receiving party of the incident. In their minds, this was certainly beyond their imaginations. In an instance, Zhou Mingrue came up with two possible options. One was to pretend that he was also a victim. He would conceal his true identity, in exchange for a certain degree of trust, so that he could wait, observe and find an appropriate opportunity. The other option was to maintain the mysteriousness image before the man and woman. Thus, he could take initiative to guide the development of events and obtain valuable information. Without much about time to analyze or evaluate the two options thoroughly, Zhou seized an idea that flashed across his mind and quickly decided to attempt the second option. To make use of the other people's current psychological state to gain the biggest advantage. There was a brief silence above the fogs for a few seconds. Zhou Mingrue chuckled lightly. He replied in a moderate tone, in a voice that was slightly low but not heavy, as if he was politely returning a visitor's greetings. "An attempt. An attempt." Audrey Hall stared at the mysterious man shrouded in gray fog and realized that the event was ridiculous, absurd, horrifying, and incredible. She was in the bedroom a moment ago, sitting before the dressing table, but in a blink of the eye she had appeared at a place full of gray fogs. How incredible it was! Audrey breathed in deeply and revealed an impeccably courteous smile. She asked shyly. "Your Excellency, is the attempt over? Can we go back now?" Alger Wilson had also intended to probe in a similar manner, but as an experienced person, he was more cautious. Therefore, he held his impulse and waited patiently at the side. Zhou looked at the person asking the question, he could vaguely see the other's figure through the fog. She was a tall and slender girl with smooth and blonde hair, but her specific appearance was blurred. He did not rush to answer the girl's question. Instead, he turned and looked at the other man. The man had dark blue hair that was as messy as seaweeds. He was also medium-sized but not robustly built. At this moment, Zhou Mingrui had a sudden insight of the situation. When he became even more powerful or had a deeper understanding of the world of fogs, his vision would be able to penetrate the fogs and see the faces of the girl and the man. As of now, they are the visitors, whereas I am the host. After a change of attitude, Zhou Mingrui immediately sensed some details that he had not noticed earlier. The images of the girl with the sweet voice and the calm-looking man were very illusory. They were tinted in dark red as if they were projections from the two crimson stars above the fog. Those projections were based on the connections between himself and Crimson, which were invisible but could be felt by him. If I cut off this connection, the projections would dissipate and they will be able to return. Zhou Mingrui nodded his head slightly. He looked at the blonde girl and chuckled softly. Okay, course, if you formally request, I can even let you return now. Audrey, who did not sense any malicious intent, heaved a sigh of relief. She believed that since the gentleman who could achieve such a miraculous act gave his words, he would most likely abide by it. As her emotions calmed down, she was no longer in a hurry to make a leave. Her azure eyes wandered curiously around and blinked. Then, she spoke in a shy but expectant voice. This is such an incredible experience. Well, I've actually always been looking forward to such things. I mean, I like mysteries and the miracles that transcend nature. No, my main point is. I mean, Your Excellency, how can I become an extraordinary? She became more excited as she spoke, to the extent that she was a little agitated and her speech became incoherent. The dream she had since young, when she listened to the strange tales of the elders, had finally found an opportunity to realize. In a moment, she had forgotten her initial fear and anxiety. Good question. I would like to know the answer too. Zhou Mingrui muttered silently. He began to ponder what kind of answer he should give to maintain the mysterious impression. At the same time, he felt that the ambience for a standing dialogue was a little unsatisfactory. For such scenes, shouldn't there be a shrine, a row of long tables, a number of high-backed chairs carved with ancient and mystical patterns, and he would sit at the host position, calmly observing the guests. Just these thoughts fell across his mind, the fog suddenly started to bubble, alarming both Audrey and Alger. In an instant, they saw tall granite pillars rising around them, with a broad dome ceiling covering the sky above them. The entire structure became grand, spectacular and magnificent, like a palace of the legendary giants. Directly below the dome, surrounded by fogs, a long bronze table appeared. There were about a dozen high-backed chairs on the right and left and they were placed directly opposite each other. The backs of the chairs were shimmering lights with a dark red background and the lights traced out strange, unknown constellations. Audrey and Alger sat opposite each other, at the position closest to the host. The young girl looked to the left and took a glance to the right at the changes. She could not help but whispered. This is so amazing, this is indeed amazing. Zhou Mingrui stretched out his right hand, and gently rubbed the edge of a long bronze table while trying to maintain a straight face. Alger, who had been observing the changes, waited for a moment before taking the initiative to answer Audrey's question instead. Are you a Ruinese? If you want to become an extraordinary, you have to either join the Church of the Goddess of the Night, the Church of the Lord of Storms, or the Church of the God of Steam and Machinery. While the vast majority of people have never seen extraordinaries in their lives, so much so that they have also doubted the existence of extraordinaries in the churches, even within the major religious organizations, many clergymen have similar thoughts. However, I can confidently tell you that extraordinaries are still in existence. In the tribunal, the judgment office, and the punishment departments, they are still fighting against the dangers that have originated from the darkness. It is just that their numbers have vastly declined compared to the beginning of the era of black iron, or the earlier eras. Zhou Mingrue listened attentively in his heart, though on the outside he tried to maintain an uninterested body posture as if he was listening to a story for children. Relying on the remnants of Klein's historical knowledge, he knew that the era of black iron referred to the current era, also known as the Fifth Era, which had begun 1,439 years ago. Audrey listened quietly. After Alger finished, she gave a sigh. "Sir, I know about all the things that you mentioned, and other things as well, such as the existence of the Night Watchers, the tribunal representatives, and the heart of the machines. However, I do not want to lose my freedom." Alger laughed in a low voice and replied vaguely. "How is it possible to become extraordinary without paying the price? If you don't intend to join a church and accept the test, you have to either go to the royal family or one of the few aristocratic families with histories that are more than 1,000 years old. Otherwise, you can try your luck at searching for one of the evil groups lurking in the shadows." Audrey subconsciously puffed her cheeks before she stopped and anxiously looked around. After realizing that both the mysterious person and the other fellow had not noticed her facial expressions, she continued. "Are there no other methods?" Alger fell silent, and after a few dozen seconds, he turned to look at the mysterious person, Zhou, who did not say anything. Seeing that the other party looked uninterested, Alger turned back to Audrey and spoke thoughtfully. "Actually, I am in possession of 2 Sequence 9 potion formulas." "Sequence 9. Zhou Mingrue muttered in silence. "Really? Which are the ones that you have?" Audrey was clearly aware of what Sequence 9 potion formulas meant. Alger leaned back slightly, and he answered in a calm voice. "As you might have already known, for humans to become truly extraordinary, we can only rely on potions. While name of the potions came from the Slate of Blasphemy, the translations have been continuously passed down from the language of the Titans, the Elvish, the ancient Hellenese, the ancient Fusak and the contemporary Hellenese. Therefore, they have now reflected the changes in the era. While the names of the potions are not important, the key is whether they can represent the symbolic essence of the potions. As for the Sequence 9 formulas that I possess, one of them is called the Sailor. It will give you excellent balance. You can even walk freely on a ship sailing across a storm as if it was on the ground. You will also gain superior strength as well as illusory scales hidden beneath your skin. It will make you as difficult to catch as a fish, as flexible as a sea being in the water, and even without any equipments, you can easily dive for at least 10 minutes. That sounds great, is it the blessed ones of the sea under the Lord of the Storms? Audrey asked with a semi-anticipating and semi-verifying mood. In ancient times, it was indeed called the blessed ones of the sea. Alger did not pause and he continued, the second Sequence 9 formula is called the Audience. I don't know what it was called in the ancient times. It will give you an energetic mind and a keen sense of observation. I believe that you have seen operas and dramas, and therefore you should understand the meaning of audience. Like in spectator, you can observe the actors of the worlds. You will be able to have a glimpse of everyone's true intentions through their expressions, behaviors, conversations, and unobtrusive body gestures. At this moment, Alger emphasized. However, you must always remember that whether it is at an extravagant party or a lively street, the audience can only be an audience. Audrey's eyes brightened and it took a while before she responded. Why is that so? Okay, that is a subsequent question. I think I like the characteristics of the audience. How can I obtain the formula for the audience? Or rather, what can I exchange with you? Alger seemed prepared for the question and he quickly answered. The blood of a ghost shark, at least 100 milliliters of a ghost shark's blood. Audrey first nodded with excitement and then inquired. If I can get it, I mean if, how can I give it to you? And how can I be sure that after you receive the blood of the ghost shark, you will pass me the formula of the potion, and the formula will be authentic? Alger replied normally. I will give you an address. After I receive the ghost shark's blood, I can either mail the formula to you or disclose it over here. As for assurance, I believe that if this mysterious sir here would be willing to be our witness, both of us can be assured. With this, he turned his attention to Zhou, who was still sitting at the host's position. Your Excellency, since you can bring us together and you obviously have powers beyond our imaginations. With your witness, none of us would dare to fraud on the exchange. Yes. Audrey's eyes brightened and she agreed excitedly. In her view, the mystery person with incredible powers was definitely of sufficient authority to witness the exchange. Neither she nor the person opposite her would have the courage to deceive him. Audrey turned her body and looked at Zhou sincerely. Your Excellency, please witness our transaction. At this moment, she had realized that she had forgotten a very important question, which made her a little impolite. Thus, she quickly followed up and asked. Your Excellency, how shall we address you? Alger nodded slightly, he turned to Zhou, asked in solemnly voice. Your Excellency, how shall we address you? Zhou Mingrui hesitated. With his finger slowly tapping on the long bronze table, the results of the divination suddenly appeared in his mind. He leaned back, retracted his right hand, crossed over his 10 fingers underneath his chin and smiled. You may address me as, then, he paused for a second before continuing in a moderate voice. The Fool. You can address me as, the Fool. The voice of the short answer quickly dissipated in the magnificent hall and the ambiguous grey fogs. However, it reverberated in the hearts of Audrey and Algar, stirring a ripple after another. It is unexpected and yet gives the correct feeling. This is a title that perfectly embodies mystery, power, and bizarreness. After a few seconds of silence, Audrey stood up. She held her shirt, bent her knees and performed a salutation for Zhou. Dear Mr. Fool, please allow me to formally request, would you be willing to witness our exchange? Not a problem. Thoughts quickly ran through Zhou's mind as he tried to reply in a way to match his identity. This is our honor, Mr. Fool. Alger followed Audrey's lead and stood up. With his right hand to his chest, he bent down and salute. Zhou Mingrui stretched his right hand and smiled. Please continue the discussion. Alger nodded and sat down again, he looked at Audrey and spoke. If you can obtain the blood of a ghost shark, get someone to send it to the Warriors and the Sea Bar, which is located at the Pelican Street, White Rose district of the port of Pritz. Tell the owner William Moss that this is something that the captain wants. After I confirm the receipt of the item, would you prefer me to send the potion formula to an address or share it with you right here? Audrey thought for a few seconds and revealed her smile. I would prefer the more confidential option, which is to disclose it right here, although it will be a test of my memory. Since the Fool has agreed to witness the exchange, there will be another similar meeting in the future. With these thoughts in mind, she suddenly turned and looked at Zhou Mingrui expectantly. With a tone of interest, she inquired. Mr. Fool, would you mind having a few more attempts like this? Alger had been listening calmly until he was also tempted by the suggestion and he quickly followed up. Mr. Fool, don't you find such meetings very interesting? Although your strength exceeds our imagination, there will always fields in the world that you don't understand or don't excel in. While the lady sitting opposite me is obviously someone of noble origin, I do have my own experiences, insights, channels, and resources. In the future, it might be possible for us to help you accomplish insignificant things that may be inconvenient for you. From his point of view, since he could not resist being pulled into the world of grey fogs, it indicated that the initiative lied in the hands of the mysterious Fool. He couldn't simply refuse to attend any future meetings. Instead, it will be more beneficial for him to take advantage of the encounter for further gains. The three parties at the long table had different backgrounds, different resources, different channels of information, and different areas of specialties in the realms of the supernatural. If they could communicate with each other and agree to a certain level of cooperation, it would produce wonderful results with immeasurable gains. An example would be the exchange of resource that had just taken place. Alternatively, if one of them intended to kill someone, he or she could rely on an unrelated meeting member. That could misguide others into a wrong direction. A lady of noble origin, are my actions and accent so obvious? Audrey's mouth was half open and she froze for a moment, but she quickly recovered and nodded without hesitation. Mr. Fool, I believe that this is a great proposal. If the meetings becomes regular, even if there are inconvenient things for you, you can simply pass them to us. Of course, they will need to be within our capabilities. Since the beginning, Zhou Mingrui had been weighing the pros and cons of the suggestion. More meetings would indeed give him more opportunities to understand the secrets of the extraordinary and the supernatural. It might even help him crossing back in the future. For instance, he would probably obtain the potion formula of the audience in the next meeting. Similarly, he could receive news that might help him in the real life. On the other hand, the more meetings he organized, the easier it would be for him to be exposed. Sure enough, no matter which worlds it is, nothing comes with only benefits. Zhou Mingrui stretched out his right hand again and tapped the edge of the long table with his fingers. As the initiation and dissolution of the meetings were within his control, even if any problems were exposed, they could be contained quickly. Taking into account that the benefits clearly outweighed the disadvantages, Zhou Mingrui made the call swiftly. His tapping motion ceased and he smiled at the two pairs of expectant and envious eyes. I'm a person who appreciates fair exchanges. I will not ask you to help unconditionally. Every Monday, try to be alone at 3 p.m. Let me attempt a few more times to figure things out. After that, maybe it will be possible for you to take leaves in advance so that you don't have to worry about being stranded in a wrong place at a wrong time. Basically, he had agreed with Alger and Audrey's proposal. Audrey was a girl who had just turned 17 years old and she had been well taken care of since young. Therefore, she had a youthful spirit. When she heard Mr. Fool's answers, she could not help but clenched her hand into a fist and swung it in front of her chest in excitement. So should we get titles for ourselves too? After all, we do not want to communicate with our real names. Not waiting for Alger to speak, her eyes sparkled and she asked with great enthusiasm. Although I may not be able to deceive the fool about my situation, the guy sitting opposite appears to be dangerous, I cannot let him know my real identity. Good idea. Zhou Mingrui answered briefly. Audrey immediately started thinking and continued. You are the fool from tarot. As a regular, long-term, and mysterious group, we should keep our titles as consistent as possible. I'll take it from the tarot too. Then, her tone became cheerful. I've decided, my title shall be Justice. It was also one of the 22 main cards of tarot. What about you, Mr.? Audrey smiled and looked at her companion, standing at the opposite side. Alger frowned as he became absorbed in thoughts, but he quickly made his decision. The Hanged Man, it was another main card. Okay, so we are now the founding members of the tarot group. Audrey happily blurted and glanced at Zhou Mingrui with a little embarrassment. Is it fine, Mr. Fool? Zhou Mingrui laughed and shook his head. For this kind of trivial matters, you can make your own decisions. Thank you. Audrey was obviously delighted. Then, she looked to Alger again. Mr. Hanged Man, can you repeat the address that you have mentioned just now? I am afraid that it has not been impressed deeply in my memory yet. No problem. Alger was quite satisfied with Audrey's sincerity and repeated the address. After repeating it in her mind 3 times, Audrey continued with her questions. I heard that the tarot was only a game invented by Russell the Great. Therefore, it does not have the capabilities of divination. No, in most cases, the results of divination actually derives from oneself. Everyone has spirituality. They can connect to the spiritual realm and link to related information at a higher level. However, ordinary people cannot notice this, let alone interpreting the prompts. When they use divination tools, this information will be presented with the help of the tools. One of the simplest examples is the dreams and their interpretations. Alger took a glance at Joe. Noticing that he did not want to say anything, he continued to explain to Audrey, tarot belongs to such types of tools. It just uses more symbols and more reasonable elements to help us understand the prompts easily and accurately. Zhou Mingrui appeared to be unconcerned, but in fact, he listened very attentively, until he felt that his mental energy began to deplete and waves of pain were coming into his brain. I see. Audrey nodded, and then she emphasized, that's not what I meant. I'm not questioning the tarot. In fact, I have heard that Russell the Great had actually created another set of cards in secret. There were the 22 cards that symbolized some unknown powers. He referred to those cards before inventing the 22 main cards of the tarot as a game. Is that accurate? She looked at Zhou as if she would like to get the answer from the mysterious fool. Zhou Mingrui could only smile and he did not respond. Instead, he turned his gaze to the hanged man as if signaling a test for him. Alger subconsciously straightened his back and replied in a deep voice. Yes, it was said that Russell the Great had read the Slate of Discretion, and the mysterious deck of cards contained 22 paths to divinity. 22 paths to divinity, Audrey repeated in a tone full of anticipation. At this time, Zhou Mingrui's headaches intensified and he felt that his invisible connection with the crimson stars and grey fogs had become unstable. Well, today's meeting shall end here. He immediately decided. As you wish. Alger bowed his head. As you wish. Audrey imitated that hanged man. She still had many questions in her head and was really reluctant to end the meeting. Zhou Mingrui cut off the connection while smiling. Let us look forward to the next meeting. The stars lit up again and the dark red shrank like water. Audrey and Alger had just heard the last sentence from The Fool, and their figures immediately became blurred and illusionary. In less than a second, the projections shattered and silence was restored above the fogs. Zhou Mingrui felt that he was getting heavy and the whimsical feeling disappeared. His sight was dark at first and then the lights of the day appeared before his eyes. He was still in the apartment, standing in the middle of the room. It's almost like a dream. What kind of world it is in the fogs? Who or rather what kind of powers created it? Zhou Mingrui muttered in a low voice and doubts rose in his mind. He stumbled towards the desk as if his legs were filled with lead. He picked up the pocket watch that he had left on the table to check how much time had passed. 1-to-1 ratio in the speed of time. Zhou Mingrui vaguely estimated. Putting down the pocket watch, he could no longer hold back his headache. He sat down on a chair, lowered his head and massaged his temples with his left thumb and middle finger. After a long time, he suddenly sighed and spoke reluctantly. It seems that I will not be able to go back, at least in the near future. Only the ignorant could be fearless. After such an incredible encounter, and learning about the extraordinaries and the mysterious world, Zhou Mingrui could no longer dare to recklessly try the luck conversion ritual in the ancient Fuzak language or the Ruinese language. Who would know what he might encounter? Perhaps it would be more incredible, or it could be horrible and deadly. At least, I should develop a deeper understanding of the supernatural before trying. Zhou Mingrui thought helplessly. Fortunately, the so-called meetings could help him and provide opportunities. After another moment of silence, he muttered with the emotions of frustration, loss, pain, and nostalgia. From now on, I'm Klein. Klein tried to switch his mind back to his plans and methodologies to alleviate his negative feelings. Next week, I will be able to hear about the formula for the audience. The meeting just now was really amazing. People from different parts of the world could cross the distances and communicate directly with each other. Well, this is a little familiar. Klein blinked for a few times and suddenly chuckled. An online social platform. TN, slight adjustments to earlier terminologies. Old, the fifth era, the era of black iron. New, the fifth epoch, the epoch of black iron. Chapter 8 Whoosh. Howling wind accompanied a downpour. The three-mast sailboat was tossed around by the crests and troughs of the incoming waves, as if it was being toyed by a giant. The crimson glow in Alger Wilson's eyes faded. He found himself still remaining on the deck and nothing appeared to have changed. Almost immediately, the quirky-shaped glass bottle in his palm shattered and the frost within melted into the rain. In seconds, there were no longer any traces left that suggested the existence of the wondrous antique. A hexagonal crystal-like snowflake emerged on Alger's palm. It then faded rapidly until it was seemingly absorbed by the flesh, vanishing completely in the process. Alger nodded his head in a hardly noticeable manner, as if he was thinking about something. He remained still and silent for a full 5 minutes. He turned around and headed for the cabin. As he was about to enter, a man who wore a similar robe embroidered with lightning patterns emerged from inside. This man, who had soft blonde hair, paused and looked at Alger. He held his right fist to his chest and said, "May the storm be with you." Alger replied with the same words and gesture. There were no emotions on his rough face, which had a well-defined structure. Alger entered the cabin after the greeting and proceeded to the captain's cabin situated at the far end of the corridor. Surprisingly, he did not encounter any sailors on the way. The whole place was as quiet as a graveyard. Behind the door to the captain's cabin, a soft brown carpet overlaid the floor. A bookshelf and a wine rack took the opposite side walls of the room. The books with their yellowish covers and wine bottles with their dark red color looked peculiar under the flickering candlelight. On the desk with the candle, there was a bottle of ink, a quill, a pair of black metallic telescope, and a sextant made of brass. Behind the desk sat a pale middle-aged man wearing a captain's hat which had a skull on it. As Alger approached him, he said menacingly, "I will not give in." "I believe you can do it," Alger said calmly, so calm that it felt like he was commenting on the weather. "You." The man seemed to be stunned by the unexpected answer. At this very moment, Alger leaned forward slightly and suddenly dashed across the room until they were only separated by the desk. "Pa!" Alger tightened his shoulder and reached out his right hand to choke the man. Illusory fish scales appeared on the back of his hand as he crazily mustered more strength to choke the man, giving him no time to respond. Crack! Amid the crisp cracking sound, the man's eyes widened as his body was lifted up. His legs twitched furiously before they soon became motionless. His pupils began to widen as he stared aimlessly. There was a stench from between his legs as his pants gradually turned moist. While lifting the man, Alger lowered his back and strode toward the wall. Bang! He used the man as a shield and smashed forward at the wall. His extremely muscular arm was monstrous. A hole cracked open in the wooden wall, and rain poured in, accompanied by the scent of the ocean. Alger flung the man out of the cabin, straight into the giant waves that resembled mountains. The wind continued to howl in the dark as almighty nature devoured everything. Alger took out a white handkerchief and wiped his right hand carefully before throwing it into the sea as well. He stepped back and waited patiently for company. In less than 10 seconds, the blond man from before rushed in and asked, "What happened?" "The captain has escaped," Alger answered in an annoyed manner as he panted. "I didn't know he still had some of his beyonder powers." "Damn it," the blond man cursed softly. He went up to the opening and stared into the distance. However, nothing was visible except for the waves and the rain. "Forget it, he was just extra loot," the blond man said, waving his arm. "We will still be rewarded for finding this ghost ship from the Tudor era." Even if he was a keeper of the sea, he would not have hastily dived into the sea under this weather condition. "The captain will not be able to survive much longer if the storm continues," Alger said, as he nodded in approval. The wooden wall was repairing itself at a discernible rate. He gazed at the wall and turned his head subconsciously towards the rudder and the sail. He was perfectly aware of what was going on behind all the wooden planks. The chief mate, the second mate, the crew, and the sailors were not present. There was no living person on board. Amidst all the emptiness, the rudder and the sail moved eerily by themselves. Alger again pictured the fool who was covered in grayish-white fog and sighed. He turned back and looked outside at the mighty waves and spoke as though in a reverie while filled with anticipation and awe. A new era has begun. Empress Borough, Backlund, capital of the Lone Kingdom. Audrey Hall pinched her cheeks in disbelief of her encounter a while ago. On the dressing table in front of her, the old bronze mirror had shattered into pieces. Audrey cast her gaze downwards and saw the swirling crimson on the back of her hand. It was like a tattoo depicting a star. The crimson gradually faded and disappeared into her skin. Only at this point in time was Audrey certain that it was not a dream. Her eyes twinkled as she grinned. She could not help but stand up before bending down to lift up the hem of her dress. She curtsied towards thin air and started dancing lively. It was the ancient elf dance, the most popular dance among royalty at the moment. She had a bright smile on her face as she moved about gracefully. Knock. Knock. Someone suddenly knocked at her bedroom door. Who is it? Audrey immediately stopped her dance and asked as she tidied her dress to look more elegant. My lady, may I come in? You should start to prepare for the ceremony, Audrey's maidservant asked from outside the door. Audrey looked into a mirror on the dressing table and quickly wiped the smile from her face, leaving only a tiny hint of a smile. She responded gently after she had ensured everything was presentable, come in. The doorknob turned and Annie, her maidservant, pushed in. Oh, it cracked. Annie said as she instantly saw the outcome of the old bronze mirror. Audrey blinked and said slowly, yes. Susie was here just now. I am sure you know she likes to wreak havoc. Susie was a golden retriever that was not so much of a purebred. It was a gift given to her father, Count Hall, when he bought a foxhound. Nevertheless, Audrey adored it. You should train it well, Annie said, as she picked up the pieces of the bronze mirror adeptly and with care, lest it hurt her mistress. As she finished tidying up, she asked Audrey with a smile, which dress do you want to put on? Audrey thought for a while and answered, I like the dress designed by Mrs. Guinea for my 17th birthday. No, you can't wear the same dress twice to a formal ceremony or others will gossip about and question the Hall family's financial ability, Annie said, shaking her head in disagreement. But I really like it. Audrey insisted in a gentle manner. You can wear it at home or when you attend an event that isn't so formal, Annie said firmly, suggesting that it was not negotiable. Then it will have to be the one with the lotus design along the sleeves given by Mr. Sada's 2 days ago, Audrey said as she drew in a gasp inconspicuously, maintaining her sweet smile. You always have such a good taste, Annie said as she stepped back and shouted towards the door, the 6th dressing room. Ah, forget it, I shall fetch it myself. Maidservants began to work. The dress, accessories, footwear, hat, makeup, and hairstyle, everything had to be taken care of. When it was almost ready, Count Hall appeared at the door wearing a dark brown waistcoat. He had a hat sharing the same color as his clothes and a nice mustache. His blue eyes were filled with joy, but his loosening muscles, widening waist, and wrinkles were obviously destroying his handsome youth. The brightest jewel of Backlund, it is time for our departure, Count Hall said, knocking at the door twice. Father. Stop calling me that, Audrey protested as she got up with the help of the maidservants. Well then, it's time to set off, my beautiful little princess, Count Hall said as he bent his left arm, signaling Audrey to hold his arm. Audrey shook her head slightly and said, that is for my mother, Mrs. Hall, the Countess. Then this side, Count Hall bent his right arm with a smile and said, this is for you, my greatest pride. The Royal Navy Base, Pritz Harbor, Oak Island. When Audrey took her father's arm and walked down the carriage, she was suddenly shocked by the juggernaut in front of her. In the military port not far away, there was a huge ship shimmering with metallic reflections. It did not have a sail, leaving only an observatory deck, 2 towering chimneys, and 2 turrets at the ends of the ship. It was so majestic and large that the fleet of sails nearby were like newborn dwarfs clustering around a giant. Holy Lord of Storms! Oh, Lord! An ironclad warship! Amidst the furor, Audrey was also shocked by this unprecedented miracle created by mankind. It was an ocean miracle that had never been seen before. It took a while for the aristocrats, ministers, and members of parliament to compose themselves. Then, a black spot on the sky started to grow in size until it occupied a third of the sky and entered everyone's view. The atmosphere suddenly became solemn. It was a gigantic flying machine with a beautiful streamlined design hovering in midair. The deep blue machine had airbags made of cotton which were supported by alloy structures that were strong but light. The alloy structure's bottom had openings mounted with machine guns, projectile launchers, and muzzles. The exaggerated humming noise from the ignition steam engine and the tail blades produced a symphony that left everyone amazed. The king's family arrived on their airship, exuding a lofty and indisputable authority. 2 swords, each with a ruby crown at the handle, were pointing vertically down and reflected the sunlight on both sides of the cabin. They were the Sword of Judgment emblem which symbolized the Augustus family and has been passed down from the previous epoch. Audrey was not yet 18, so she had not attended the introductory ceremony, which was an event led by the Empress that marked one's debut into the Backlund social scene, to announce her adult status. Therefore, she could not be nearer to the airship and had to remain silent at the back to watch the entire event. Nevertheless, it did not matter to her. In fact, she was relieved that she did not need to deal with the princes. The miracle that mankind used to conquer the sky touched down gently. The first ones to step down the stairs were the handsome young guards who wore red ceremonial uniforms with white trousers. Decorated with medals, they formed 2 lines with rifles in hand. They were awaiting the appearances of King George III, his queen, and the prince and princess. Audrey was not new to meeting important people, so she showed no interest at all. Instead, she had her attention on the 2 statue-like black-armored cavalry flanking the king. In this era of iron, steam, and cannons, it was surprising that there was still someone who could bear wearing full armor. The cold metallic luster and the dull black helmet conveyed solemnity and authority. Could they be the higher-order disciplinary paladins? Audrey recalled snippets of a casual conversation among adults. She was curious but did not dare go close. The ceremony commenced with the arrival of the king's family. The incumbent prime minister, Lord Eposide, went up to the front. He was a member of the Conservative Party and the second non-aristocrat to become the prime minister till this very day. He was given the title of a lord for his great contributions. Of course, Audrey knew more. The main supporter of the Conservative Party was the present Duke of Negan, Pallas Negan, who was the brother of Eposide. Eposide was a slender and almost bald 50-plus-year-old man with a sharp gaze. He surveyed the area before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you have witnessed this history-making ironclad warship. It has dimensions of 101 by 21 meters. It has an amazing port and starboard design. The armor belt is 457 millimeters thick. The displacement is 10,060 tons. There are 4 305 mm main cannons, 6 rapid-fire cannons, 12 6-pound cannons, 18 6-barrel machine guns, and 4 torpedo launchers. It can reach a speed of 16 knots. It will be the real hegemon. It will conquer the seas. The crowd was roused. The mere descriptions were enough to instill fearful images in them, let alone the fact that the actual thing was right in front of them. Eposide smiled and spoke a few more lines before saluting the king and requested, "Your Majesty, please give it a name. Since it will set sail from Pritz Harbor, it should be named the Pritz," George III responded. His expression showed his delight. The Pritz. The Pritz. The word spread from the Navy Minister and the Admiral of the Royal Navy to all the soldiers and officers on the deck. They all exclaimed in unison, "The Prince." George III ordered the Prince to set sail for a trial in the midst of the gun salutes and the celebratory atmosphere. Honk! Thick smoke spewed out from the chimneys. The sound from the machinery could be heard faintly beneath the sound of the ship horn. The juggernaut departed from the harbor. Everyone was shocked, and the two main cannons at the ship's bow fired at an uninhabited island in its path. Boom! 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 The ground shook as dust shot up into the sky. Shock waves spread out, producing waves in the sea. Satisfied, Eposide turned back to the crowd and announced, "From this day on, doomsday will fall on the 7 pirates who call themselves admirals and the 4 who call themselves kings. They can only shiver in fear. It is the end of their era. Only the ironclad warship will roam the seas, no matter whether the pirates have the powers of the Beyonders, ghost ships, or cursed ships." Eposide's chief secretary deliberately asked, "Can't they build their own ironclad warships?" Some of the nobles and members of parliament nodded, feeling that such a possibility could not be eliminated. Eposide immediately smiled and shook his head slowly as he answered, "Impossible. It will never be possible. Building our ironclad warship required 3 big coal and steel amalgamators, a scale of more than 20 steel factories, 60 scientists and senior engineers from the Backland Cannon Academy in Pritz Nautical Academy, 2 royal shipyards, almost 100 factories for spare parts, an admiralty, a shipbuilding committee, a cabinet, a determined king with excellent foresight, and a great country with an annual steel production of 12 million tons. The pirates will never achieve it." Having said that, he paused and raised his arms before shouting in agitation, "Ladies and gentlemen, the era of cannons and warships has dawned upon us." Whoosh! Howling wind accompanied a downpour. The 3-mast sailboat was tossed around by the crests and troughs of the incoming waves, as if it was being toyed by a giant. The crimson glow in Alger Wilson's eyes faded. He found himself still remaining on the deck, and nothing appeared to have changed. Almost immediately, the quirky-shaped glass bottle in his palm shattered and the frost within melted into the rain. In seconds, there were no longer any traces left that suggested the existence of the wondrous antique. A hexagonal crystal-like snowflake emerged on Alger's palm. It then faded rapidly until it was seemingly absorbed by the flesh, vanishing completely in the process. Alger nodded his head in a hardly noticeable manner, as if he was thinking about something. He remained still and silent for a full 5 minutes. He turned around and headed for the cabin. As he was about to enter, a man who wore a similar robe embroidered with lightning patterns emerged from inside. This man, who had soft blonde hair, paused and looked at Alger. He held his right fist to his chest and said, "May the storm be with you." Alger replied with the same words and gesture. There were no emotions on his rough face, which had a well-defined structure. Alger entered the cabin after the greeting and proceeded to the captain's cabin situated at the far end of the corridor. Surprisingly, he did not encounter any sailors on the way. The whole place was as quiet as a graveyard. Behind the door to the captain's cabin, a soft brown carpet overlaid the floor. A bookshelf and a wine rack took the opposite side walls of the room. The books with their yellowish covers and wine bottles with their dark red color looked peculiar under the flickering candlelight. On the desk with the candle, there was a bottle of ink, a quill, a pair of black metallic telescope, and a sextant made of brass. Behind the desk sat a pale middle-aged man wearing a captain's hat which had a skull on it. As Alger approached him, he said menacingly, "I will not give in." "I believe you can do it," Alger said calmly, so calm that it felt like he was commenting on the weather. "You." The man seemed to be stunned by the unexpected answer. At this very moment, Alger leaned forward slightly and suddenly dashed across the room until they were only separated by the desk paw. Alger tightened his shoulder and reached out his right hand to choke the man. Illusory fish scales appeared on the back of his hand as he crazily mustered more strength to choke the man, giving him no time to respond. Crack. Amid the crisp cracking sound, the man's eyes widened as his body was lifted up. His legs twitched furiously before they soon became motionless. His pupils began to widen as he stared aimlessly. There was a stench from between his legs as his pants gradually turned moist while lifting the man. Alger lowered his back and strode toward the wall. Bang. He used the man as a shield and smashed forward at the wall. His extremely muscular arm was monstrous. A hole cracked open in the wooden wall, and rain poured in, accompanied by the scent of the ocean. Alger flung the man out of the cabin, straight into the giant waves that resembled mountains. The wind continued to howl in the dark as almighty nature devoured everything. Alger took out a white handkerchief and wiped his right hand carefully before throwing it into the sea. As well, he stepped back and waited patiently for company. In less than 10 seconds, the blond man from before rushed in and asked, "What happened?" "The captain has escaped," Alger answered in an annoyed manner as he panted. "I didn't know he still had some of his beyonder powers." "Damn it," the blond man cursed softly. He went up to the opening and stared into the distance. However, nothing was visible except for the waves and the rain. "Forget it, he was just extra loot," the blond man said, waving his arm. "We will still be rewarded for finding this ghost ship from the Tudor era." Even if he was a keeper of the sea, he would not have hastily dived into the sea under this weather condition. "The captain will not be able to survive much longer if the storm continues," Alger said, as he nodded in approval. The wooden wall was repairing itself at a discernible rate. He gazed at the wall and turned his head subconsciously towards the rudder and the sail. He was perfectly aware of what was going on behind all the wooden planks. The chief mate, the second mate, the crew, and the sailors were not present. There was no living person on board. Amidst all the emptiness, the rudder and the sail moved eerily by themselves. Alger again pictured the fool who was covered in grayish-white fog inside. He turned back and looked outside at the mighty waves and spoke as though in a reverie while filled with anticipation and awe. "A new era has begun. Empress Borough, Backland, capital of the Lone Kingdom." Audrey Hall pinched her cheeks in disbelief of her encounter a while ago on the dressing table in front of her. The old bronze mirror had shattered into pieces. Audrey cast her gaze downwards and saw the swirling crimson on the back of her hand. It was like a tattoo depicting a star. The crimson gradually faded and disappeared into her skin. Only at this point in time was Audrey certain that it was not a dream. Her eyes twinkled as she grinned. She could not help but stand up. Before bending down to lift up the hem of her dress, she curtsied towards thin air and started dancing lively. It was the ancient elf dance, the most popular dance among royalty at the moment. She had a bright smile on her face as she moved about gracefully. Knock. Knock. Someone suddenly knocked at her bedroom door. "Who is it?" Audrey immediately stopped her dance and asked as she tidied her dress to look more elegant. "My lady, may I come in?" "You should start to prepare for the ceremony," Audrey's maidservant asked from outside the door. Audrey looked into a mirror on the dressing table and quickly wiped the smile from her face, leaving only a tiny hint of a smile. She responded gently after she had ensured everything was presentable, "Come in." The doorknob turned and Annie, her maidservant, pushed in. "Oh," it cracked. Annie said as she instantly saw the outcome of the old bronze mirror. Audrey blinked and said slowly, Yes. Susie was here just now. I am sure you know she likes to wreak havoc." Susie was a golden retriever that was not so much of a purebred. It was a gift given to her father, Count Hall, when he bought a foxhound. Nevertheless, Audrey adored it. "You should train it well," Annie said, as she picked up the pieces of the bronze mirror adeptly and with care, lest it hurt her mistress. As she finished tidying up, she asked Audrey with a smile, "Which dress do you want to put on?" Audrey thought for a while and answered, "I like the dress designed by Mrs. Guinea for my 17th birthday." "No, you can't wear the same dress twice to a formal ceremony or others will gossip about and question the Hall family's financial ability," Annie said, shaking her head in disagreement, "but I really like it." Audrey insisted in a gentle manner, "You can wear it at home or when you attend an event that isn't so formal," Annie said firmly, suggesting that it was not negotiable. "Then it will have to be the one with the lotus design along the sleeves given by Mr. Sadas 2 days ago," Audrey said as she drew in a gasp inconspicuously, maintaining her sweet smile. "You always have such a good taste," Annie said as she stepped back and shouted towards the door, "The 6th dressing room." "Ah, forget it, I shall fetch it myself." Maidservants began to work. The dress, accessories, footwear, hat, makeup, and hairstyle, everything had to be taken care of. When it was almost ready, Count Hall appeared at the door wearing a dark brown waistcoat. He had a hat sharing the same color as his clothes and a nice mustache. His blue eyes were filled with joy, but his loosening muscles, widening waist, and wrinkles were obviously destroying his handsome youth. The brightest jewel of Backland, it is time for our departure, Count Hall said, knocking at the door twice. Father. Stop calling me that, Audrey protested as she got up with the help of the maidservants. Well then, it's time to set off, my beautiful little princess, Count Hall said as he bent his left arm, signaling Audrey to hold his arm. Audrey shook her head slightly and said, that is for my mother, Mrs. Hall, the Countess. Then this side, Count Hall bent his right arm with a smile and said, this is for you, my greatest pride. The Royal Navy Base, Pritz Harbor, Oak Island. When Audrey took her father's arm and walked down the carriage, she was suddenly shocked by the juggernaut in front of her. In the military port not far away, there was a huge ship shimmering with metallic reflections. It did not have a sail, leaving only an observatory deck, 2 towering chimneys, and 2 turrets at the ends of the ship. It was so majestic and large that the fleet of sails nearby were like newborn dwarfs clustering around a giant, holy lord of storms. Oh, Lord! An ironclad warship. Amidst the furor, Audrey was also shocked by this unprecedented miracle created by mankind. It was an ocean miracle that had never been seen before. It took a while for the aristocrats, ministers, and members of parliament to compose themselves. Then, a black spot on the sky started to grow in size until it occupied a third of the sky and entered everyone's view. The atmosphere suddenly became solemn. It was a gigantic flying machine with a beautiful streamlined design hovering in midair. The deep blue machine had airbags made of cotton which were supported by alloy structures that were strong but light. The alloy structure's bottom had openings mounted with machine guns, projectile launchers, and muzzles. The exaggerated humming noise from the ignition steam engine and the tail blades produced a symphony that left everyone amazed. The king's family arrived on their airship, exuding a lofty and indisputable authority. 2 swords, each with a ruby crown at the handle, were pointing vertically down and reflected the sunlight on both sides of the cabin. They were the Sword of Judgment emblem which symbolized the Augustus family and has been passed down from the previous epoch. Audrey was not yet 18, so she had not attended the introductory ceremony, which was an event led by the Empress that marked one's debut into the Backland social scene, to announce her adult status. Therefore, she could not be nearer to the airship and had to remain silent at the back to watch the entire event. Nevertheless, it did not matter to her. In fact, she was relieved that she did not need to deal with the princes. The miracle that mankind used to conquer the sky touched down gently. The first ones to step down the stairs were the handsome young guards who wore red ceremonial uniforms with white trousers. Decorated with medals, they formed 2 lines with rifles in hand. They were awaiting the appearances of King George III, his queen, and the prince and princess. Audrey was not new to meeting important people, so she showed no interest at all. Instead, she had her attention on the 2 statue-like black armored cavalry flanking the king. In this era of iron, steam, and cannons, it was surprising that there was still someone who could bear wearing full armor. The cold metallic luster and the dull black helmet conveyed solemnity and authority. Could they be the higher-order disciplinary paladins? Audrey recalled snippets of a casual conversation among adults. She was curious but did not dare go close. The ceremony commenced with the arrival of the king's family. The incumbent prime minister, Lord Eposide, went up to the front. He was a member of the Conservative Party and the second non-aristocrat to become the prime minister till this very day. He was given the title of a lord for his great contributions. Of course, Audrey knew more. The main supporter of the Conservative Party was the present Duke of Negan, Pallas Negan, who was the brother of Eposide. Eposide was a slender and almost bald 50-plus-year-old man with a sharp gaze. He surveyed the area before speaking. Ladies and gentlemen, I believe you have witnessed this history-making ironclad warship. It has dimensions of 101 by 21 meters. It has an amazing port and starboard design. The armor belt is 457 millimeters thick. The displacement is 10,060 tons. There are 4 305mm main cannons, 6 rapid-fire cannons, 12 6-pound cannons, 18 6-barrel machine guns, and 4 torpedo launchers. It can reach a speed of 16 knots. It will be the real hegemon. It will conquer the seas. The crowd was roused. The mere descriptions were enough to instill fearful images in them, let alone the fact that the actual thing was right in front of them. Eposide smiled and spoke a few more lines before saluting the king and requested, "Your Majesty, please give it a name. Since it will set sail from Pritz Harbor, it should be named, the Pritz," George III responded. His expression showed his delight. The Pritz. The Pritz. The word spread from the Navy Minister and the Admiral of the Royal Navy to all the soldiers and officers on the deck. They all exclaimed in unison, "The Pritz." George III ordered the Pritz to set sail for a trial in the midst of the gun salutes and the celebratory atmosphere. Honk. Thick smoke spewed out from the chimneys. The sound from the machinery could be heard faintly beneath the sound of the ship horn. The Juggernaut departed from the harbor. Everyone was shocked, and the 2 main cannons at the ship's bow fired at an uninhabited island in its path. Boom. 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 The ground shook as dust shot up into the sky. Shock waves spread out, producing waves in the sea. Satisfied, Wuxia turned back to the crowd and announced, "From this day on, doomsday will fall on the 7 pirates who call themselves admirals and the 4 who call themselves kings. They can only shiver in fear. It is the end of their era. Only the ironclad warship will roam the seas, no matter whether the pirates have the powers of the Beyonders, ghost ships, or cursed ships." Wuxia's chief secretary deliberately asked, "Can't they build their own ironclad warships?" Some of the nobles and members of parliament nodded, feeling that such a possibility could not be eliminated. Wuxia immediately smiled and shook his head slowly as he answered, "Impossible. It will never be possible. Building our ironclad warship required 3 big coal and steel amalgamators, a scale of more than 20 steel factories, 60 scientists and senior engineers from the Backlund Cannon Academy in Pritz Nautical Academy, 2 royal shipyards, almost 100 factories for spare parts, an admiralty, a shipbuilding committee, a cabinet, a determined king with excellent foresight, and a great country with an annual steel production of 12 million tons. The pirates will never achieve it." Having said that, he paused and raised his arms before shouting in agitation, "Ladies and gentlemen, the era of cannons and warships has dawned upon us." After half an hour's rest, Klein had gradually recovered. During that time, he discovered 4 newly formed black spots on the back of his right hand. They made up a small square. The 4 dark spots faded from sight and disappeared quickly, but Klein knew they were still hidden in his body and waiting to be awakened. 4 points and a square. Do they correspond to the 4 portions of staple food in the 4 corners? Perhaps after this, I don't need to prepare the staple food for the ritual anymore. I might be able to go straight to the pacing and cite the spell. Klein made a rough guess. This may seem advantageous, but there is something in the body that you don't understand. This is scary. Despite the hot June weather, Klein could not help but shudder. Why the inexplicable ritual on the earth could actually produce an effect here? Why did he cross over during his dreams? What did the mystical and mind-blowing gray world of fogs represent? What were the maddening whispers during the ritual? He recalled a phrase. The oldest and most intense emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and most intense fear is the fear of the unknown. Now, he deeply felt the fear of the unknown. In an unprecedented and unyielding way, he had a strong desire to reach out to the mystical realm to learn more about it and dispel his doubts. Yet at the same time, he also felt an impulse to pretend that nothing had happened. The sun was a glowing medallion in the sky, and the radiant rays covered the desk with a layer of golden powder. Klein glanced out of the window and felt a tint of warmth and hope. He relaxed a bit and immediately felt a surge of tiredness flooding towards him. Last night's lack of sleep and the exhaustion from the ritual had made his eyelids as heavy as lead. He found it hard to stop them from closing. Shaking his head, Klein reached for the edge of the table to support himself. Without even bothering to pick up the pieces of bread, he staggered his way to the bed. Once he lay down, with his head touching the pillow, he had immediately fallen asleep. Klein woke up with hunger and a growl in the stomach. He opened his eyes and felt refreshed. There is still a slight headache. He rubbed his forehead and sat up. He was so hungry that he could almost eat a whole cow. As he straightened the folds of his clothes, he returned to the desk and picked up the silver-white vine-pattern pocket watch. Pa! The lid popped open and he saw the seconds hand ticking slowly. It is 12:30, I have slept for more than 3 hours. Klein swallowed his saliva and put the pocket watch in the linen shirt pocket. In the northern continent, the day was divided into 24 hours, 60 minutes per hour, and 60 seconds per minute. As for whether the length of each second was the same as on Earth, Klein had no ways to verify. At the moment, even the occult studies, the ritual, and the world of fogs were not at the top of his mind. The most important thing was food. I need to eat before I can think of a way. Without hesitation, Klein took back the dark rye bread from 4 corners and cleaned off some of the dust. He intended to consume one of them for noon. There was a custom of eating offerings after rituals in his hometown. Therefore, it was fine for him as there were also no visible changes to the 4 rye pieces of bread. Furthermore, he had only 5 pence left in his pocket. He felt a need to be more diligent and thrifty. Of course, it was also due to the subtle influence of the original Klein's memory fragments and living habits. Gas was too expensive. It was distressful to use gas even for lighting. Thus, Klein took out of the furnace and added some coal. Then, he paced back and forth, waiting for the water to boil. With this kind of rye bread, eating it dry can cause choking. Oh no! Do I have to live with dark rye bread in the morning, dark rye bread in the noon, and only meat in the evening? Wait, if it weren't for Melissa's consideration of my upcoming interview, I could probably only eat meat twice a week. Klein was so hungry that he couldn't think straight anymore. When he recalled the pound of mutton, he looked at the kitchen closet and his eyes turned green. I have to wait for Melissa. Klein shook his head violently, subduing his desire. He had lived alone in a big city before. Therefore, he had managed to hone his cooking skills despite eating outside frequently. While he was not at a level of chef, it was still good enough. Turning around, Klein suddenly remembered that in the morning he had not only bought meat but peas and potatoes too. Potatoes! Klein instantly had an idea. He rushed to the kitchen closet like a whirlwind and took out 2 potatoes from the handful in the drawer. First, he went to the shared washroom to clean the skins of the potatoes thoroughly. Next, he put them into the kettle and boiled them together with the water. After a long while, he took out the seasoning box from the cupboard, opened the lid, and sparkled a little yellowish and coarse salt into the water. Waiting patiently for a few more minutes, Klein lifted the kettle. He poured the water into a few cups and a bowl. Then, he used a fork to pierce the 2 potatoes and placed them on the table. He peeled off a little of the skin while blowing off the heat on his hand. The smell of the cooked potatoes started diffusing in the air and it was appetizing. With saliva secreting madly, Klein could not wait to finish peeling the potato. While the potatoes were still rather hot, he had taken a fierce bite on one of them. It was powdery and tasty. Klein was in tears. He quickly devoured the 2 potatoes, together with a little bit of the skin. After that, he took the bowl and drank a little of the soup. The light savory taste washed his dry mouth. When I was a child, I loved to eat like this. Klein finally had something in his stomach. He then proceeded to break the dark rye bread with his hands and soaked them into the soup. Perhaps the ritual consumed too much energy. Thus, he also ate 2 pieces of rye bread. After cleaning up, Klein felt that he was completely reinvigorated again. He could enjoy the feeling of being alive and the warmth of the sun. He returned to the desk and began to think about the next steps. I can't just run away. I must think of ways to gain experience in the mystical realm and to become the extraordinaries mentioned by Justice and the Hanged Man. To overcome the fear of the unknown. The only solution now is to wait for the next meeting and try to listen to the potion formula of the audience or some other knowledge of the mystical realm. There are 4 more days before Monday. Prior to the meeting, I will still need to confront the problems faced by the original self. Why did he commit suicide? What happened to him? Since it was no longer possible to cross back and leave, Klein picked up the notebook that he had left on the table. He wanted to see if there were any clues that might help to complete his fragmented memory. Fortunately, the original Klein had the habit of taking notes and he had used the notes as a diary. Klein also knew that the right cupboard of the desk was full of notebooks. The notebook in his hand was in use since May 10th. The first part was mainly about the school life. It described his mentors and the knowledge in school. May 12, Mr. Askey mentioned that the lingua franca of the Byron Empire in the southern continent also originated from the ancient Fuzak, which used to be a branch of the Giants' languages. Why is this so? Is it possible that all intelligent creatures had once used the same language? No, it must be wrong. In the records mentioned by the Revelations of the Night and the Book of the Storms, the giants were not the only masters of the land. There were elves, unusual species, and dragons as well. Well, those were all legends and myths. May 16, Senior Associate Professor Cohen and Mr. Askey discussed the inevitability of the steam era. Mr. Askey believed that this was accidental. If it wasn't for the sudden appearance of Russell the Great, perhaps the northern continent is still in the same conditions as the southern continent, living in an era of swords and shields. However, the mentor believed that he placed too much emphasis on the role of an individual. He asserted that with the development of time, even without Russell the Great, there would be a Robert the Great. In short, the steam era may be delayed, but it will inevitably arrive. I am not interested in their discussion. I just think that it is a little meaningless. In fact, I prefer to discover new things and restore the history beneath the fogs. Perhaps, I should not have come to the Department of History. I could have gone to the Department of Archaeology. On May 29, Welch came to me and told me that he had discovered a notebook of the Fourth Epoch. My goddess, a notebook of the Fourth Epoch. He didn't intend to go to the archaeological students. Instead, he asked me and Naya for help to decipher the contents. How could I refuse such an opportunity? Of course, I will arrange for this after my thesis defense. As of now, I cannot be distracted. Seeing this, Klein's interest became aroused. In comparison to reading historical notes and conceptual arguments of the past, the newly mentioned Fourth Epoch notebook was more likely to have caused the original self-suicide. The Fourth Epoch was the period before the Epoch of Black Iron. Its history was shrouded in darkness with many missing parts. The number of unearthed tombs, ancient cities, and literature from that epoch was extremely rare. Historians and archaeologists could only use vague descriptions from the theological books of the 7 major churches to piece together a rough impression of the era. It was known to have the existence of the Solomon Empire, the Tortun dynasty, and the Trans-Zoroaster Empire. Klein, who was determined to unveil the fogs of the past and restore the truths behind history, had little interest in the Third Epoch, which comprised of mainly myths and legends. He was more passionate about the Fourth Epoch, which was also known as the Epoch of the Gods. It would not be hard to imagine his excitement on the matter. Oh, by the way, the original self's concern on the interview and his worries about future employment were not that necessary. Klein couldn't help but sigh. At present, universities were still very scarce. The vast majority of students came from noble or wealthy families. When civilians entered, they might be discriminated against because of their status, or not included in the other people's social circles. However, as long as they were not extreme, they could build valuable relationships from the group discussions and group activities. For example, Welch McGovern was the son of a banker in Coyston, in Tercey province of the Ruined Kingdom. He was a generous person who spent lavishly. Furthermore, he had been in the same assignment group with Klein and Naya for a long time. Therefore, he had consistently asked them for help. Without getting distracted too much, Klein continued reading the notes. June 18, graduation. Goodbye. Hoi University. June 19, I saw the notebook. After comparing the sentence structure and root words, it was found to be in a variant of the ancient Fusak language. More precisely, for more than 1,000 years, the ancient Fusak has been slightly evolving with time. June 20, we deciphered the contents of the first page. The author was a member of a family called Antigonus. June 21, he mentioned the Dark Emperor. This is completely in contradiction with the previously deciphered contents of that era. Is it true that the mentor's views are wrong and that the Dark Emperor was actually the common title of every emperor of the Solomon Empire? June 22, the Antigonus family seemed to have a prominent place in the Solomon Empire. The owner of the note mentioned that he had a secret deal with someone called Tortun. The Tortun dynasty. June 23, I have to control myself to stop thinking about the notebook and not going to Welch's place. I have an upcoming interview. This is very important. June 24, Naya told me they had a new discovery. I think I should take a look. June 25, according to the new interpretations, the owner of the notebook accepted a mission to visit the main peak of the Honakis Mountains. His destination was the Kingdom of the Night located at the top of the peak. My goddess, the main peak of the Honakis is more than 6,000 meters high. How could a country exist? What did they survive on? June 26, are all these strange things real? Here, the notes ended and Zhou crossed over in the early morning of June 28. It is more appropriate to say, there is a line of note for June 27. It is that sentence. Everyone will die, including me. Klein turned to the initial page he had seen and felt goosebumps rising on his skin again. He speculated that in order to solve the mystery of the original self-suicide, he would need to visit Welch and take another look at the contents of the ancient notebook. However, with the rich experiences from web novels, movies, and television drama, he had a hunch that if he had gone back, and if everything was indeed related to the notebook, there would definitely be unforeseen dangers. It was like those people who courted their death by daring themselves to visit a haunted castle. I can't go back, but I shouldn't do nothing. Trying to avoid the problem will never resolve it. It may accumulate until one day where it finally explodes, drowning myself. Should I inform the police? But can I tell them that I've killed myself? Done. 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 Suddenly, there was a series of sudden and powerful knocks at the door. Klein quickly sat up and listened. Done. Done. The sounds of knocking reverberated in the lonely corridor aisle. TN adjusted some terms in earlier chapters. Tuzan era, old, Tortun era, new. Who is that? Klein was still thinking about the mysterious suicide of the original self and the unknown dangers that he might be exposed to. He was startled upon hearing the sudden knocks on the door. He subconsciously opened the drawer and took the revolver out in vigilance. It was quiet for 2 seconds and then he heard a shout in a sharp Awa accent. It's me, Billy. Billy Mountbatten. The voice paused and added. Police. Billy Mountbatten. As soon as he heard the name, Klein immediately recalled the corresponding person. Billy was one of the policemen in charge of the area where the apartment was located. He was a rude and slightly violent person. Of course, perhaps only such a man could handle the drunkards, thieves, part-time thieves, thugs, and rogues in the area. The unique voice was one of his trademarks. Okay, I'll be right here. Klein replied in a loud voice. At first, he had intended to put the revolver back into the drawer. However, he did not know why the police were there and if they would conduct a search in the house. Therefore, he ran to the extinguished stove and carefully inserted the revolver into it. Immediately after that, he picked up the basket of coal and put a few pieces into the stove to cover the pistol. Finally, he placed the kettle on top of the stove to shield everything from sight. After all this, he tidied his shirt and quickly approached the door. As he opened the door, he explained vaguely. "Sorry, I was taking a nap." There were 4 policemen wearing black uniforms, white stripes, and badged soft hats standing outside the door. Billy, who had kept a brown beard, coughed and spoke. "These 3 police officers would like to ask you some questions." "Police officers?" Klein instinctively looked at the ranks on their shoulders, found that 2 of them had 3 silver 6-pointed stars and the other one had 2 stars. All their ranks looked superior to Billy Mountbatten, who only had a 3V tag. As a student of history, Klein had little understanding of the levels of police badges. He only knew that Billy often showed off his rank of senior sheriff. "So, are they 3 inspectors?" Under the influence of his brother Benson, Welch and other classmates, Klein did have some common knowledge. He walked to the side of the door and gestured towards the inside of the house. "Please come in." "What it is regarding?" The 3 police officers appeared to be headed by a middle-aged man with sharp, piercing eyes. His had obvious wrinkles around the edge of the eyes and the lines on his police hat were slightly brown. He looked around the room and spoke in a low voice. "Do you know Mr. Welch McGovern?" What had happened to him? Klein had a bad premonition. "I'm asking you a question." The fierce middle-aged police officer gave a cold-eyed stare at Klein. The second police officer, who was also wearing a 3-star badge, looked at Klein with a smile. "Don't be too nervous. We are just asking the routine questions." The police officer was about 30 years old. He had an upright nose and a pair of gray pupils that gave a subtle sense of depth. They felt like an inaccessible lake in an ancient forest. Klein secretly took a deep breath and tried to organize his words. "Are you referring to Welch McGovern from Coyston, who is also a graduate of Hoey University?" "If so, I can confirm that we are classmates. We followed the same tutor, Senior Associate Professor Cohen." In the Kingdom of Ruin, professor was not only a professional title but also a position. It was like the combination of a professor and a dean on the earth. In other words, there could only be one professor in a university department. For an associate professor to become a full professor, he would need to wait for the boss to retire, or force him or her out. In view of the need to retain talents, the Higher Education Commission of the Kingdom had, after years of trial and error, added senior associate professors into the previously 3-tier system of lecturers, associate professors, and professors. They would be given to people with high academic qualifications who were old enough but could not become professors. Here, Klein looked at the eyes of the middle-aged police officer. After pausing for a second, he continued. "To be honest, our relationship was fairly good. Over the past few weeks, both me and him, as well as Naya, often meet to read and discuss the 4th epoch literature he had obtained." It was a notebook. "Sir, may I know what had happened to him?" The middle-aged police officer did not answer. Instead, he turned over to look at his gray pupil colleague. The gray pupil police officer wore a badge, a soft hat, and had average-looking features. He replied gently. "I'm sorry, Mr. McGovern had passed away." How could it be? Although he had some anticipation, Klein could not help but felt shocked. Did Welch also die like the original Klein? This is quite scary. What about Naya? Klein hurriedly asked. Ms. Naya had also passed away, said the gray pupil officer in a very calm voice. They both died in Mr. McGovern's house. Murdered? Klein vaguely guessed. Perhaps suicide, the gray pupil officer shook his head. No, from the evidence of the scene, they had committed suicide. Mr. McGovern had knocked his head against the wall many times until the wall was covered with blood. Ms. Naya had drowned herself in a basin. The kind of wash basin in homes. This can't be. Klein could feel goosebumps on his skins when he tried to imagine that strange scenario. A girl kneeling on a chair and burying her face into a wash basin filled with water. Her soft brown hair draped into the water and swayed with the breeze, while the body was motionless. Welch lied on the ground with his back, his eyes fixed on the ceiling, and his forehead was completely crushed. Blood splattered everywhere and the wall covered with trails of blood. The gray pupil police officer continued and spoke. We also thought so, but the results of the autopsy and on-site evidence have excluded factors such as drugs and external forces. They, I mean Mr. McGovern and Ms. Naya, had shown no traces of resistance. Not waiting for Klein to speak, he stepped into the room and asked casually. When was the last time you met Mr. McGovern or Ms. Naya? While he was talking, he motioned to his companion with the 2 silver stars rank. The third police officer was a young man who looked almost the same age as Klein. He had dark green pupils and looked handsome. He also had the romantic temperament of a poet. When Klein heard the question, thoughts ran through his mind quickly as he replied. It should be June 26th. We met to decipher a new passage from the notebook. After that, I returned home to prepare for the interview on the 30th. Well, it was an interview at the Department of History at the University of Tengen. The city of Tengen was also known as the City of Universities. There were 2 universities, Tengen and Hoi. Apart from that, the city also had a technical school, a barrister's college, and a business school. In terms of education infrastructure, it was just behind the capital, Beckland. Just as he had just finished speaking, he saw the young police officer approaching the desk and picking up his diary-like notes. Oh no! I've forgotten to hide it. Klein could only utter. You! The young police officer smiled at him but did not stop flipping through the notes, and the gray pupil officer explained. This is a necessary procedure. All the while, both Billy Mountbatten and the fierce-looking middle-aged police officer just watched from the side. They didn't interrupt the conversation nor assist in the search. Where is your search warrant? Klein had intended to ask such a question, but he recalled that the judicial system of Ruined Kingdom did not seem to have come up with search warrants yet. At least, he did not know about it. In fact, even the police team was only established about 15 or 16 years ago. When the original Klein was a child, they were just called guards. Klein couldn't stop the search. He helplessly watched the young police officer flipping through his notes quickly, and the gray pupil officer did not ask any further questions. What are the strange things? The young police officer turned to the end and suddenly asked, and what does this sentence mean? Everybody will die, including me. Isn't it common sense that everybody will die except for the gods? At first, Klein had intended to argue, but he suddenly remembered he had initially wanted to seek help from the police as a defense against the possible dangers. It was just that he had not been able to find any excuses. In less than a second, he made a decision. First, he covered his forehead with his hand and then he replied with pain. I don't know. I really don't know. Since waking up this morning, I have been feeling not right. It seems that I have forgotten something, especially what had happened in last 2 days. I'm not sure why I wrote the sentence. Sometimes, honesty was the best way to solve the problem. Of course, honesty needed to apply skillfully. You would have to understand what could be said versus what could not be said, and what to talk first versus what to talk later. As a keyboard warrior, Klein had some basic understanding about this. Absurd. Do you think we are idiots? Billy Mountbatten furiously interjected into the conversation. He could not help but felt insulted. The lie is too clumsy. You are simply mocking our intelligence. Even feigning mental illness is better than pretending to have amnesia. It's true, Klein responded calmly to Billy and the middle-aged police officer. It could not be any further from the truth. Perhaps it is. The gray pupil officer slowly opened his mouth. What? You believe it so easily? Klein was surprised himself. The gray pupil police officer smiled and looked at him. An expert will come down in 2 days' time. Believe me, she would be able to help you recover your missing memories. Expert. Help me recover my missing memories. The field of psychology. Klein frowned. Hey, what if the expert discovered that I have come from Earth? He suddenly felt a toothache. The young police officer put down the notebook and searched the desk and the room. Fortunately, he focused on books and did not notice the kettle. Well, Mr. Moretti, thank you for your cooperation. In the next few days, please do not leave Tengen. If you have to, please inform Officer Mountbatten. Otherwise, you will be regarded an escaped criminal. The gray pupil officer warned. Is this over? That's all for today. No further questions, or further investigation. Do I not need to go to the police station? Klein pondered. Since he also wanted to resolve the strange troubles of the original self, he replied and nodded. No problem. As police officers took turns to exit the room, the young officer at the end patted Klein's shoulders suddenly. You are very lucky. What? Klein looked up in confusion. The green pupil police officer with poetic temperament gave a mild smile. Generally speaking, it is normal for all parties to die in the event of such an incident. We are very glad and lucky to see that you are still alive. After he finished, he walked out of the room and closed the door in a well-educated manner. It is normal for all parties to die. Glad that I'm still alive. Lucky to see me alive. In the afternoon of June, Klein felt a chill running down his spine.